At 2:47 a.m. on a rain-soaked Thursday, Caleb Turner stood in a flooded penthouse bathroom, watching a woman in a $3,000 suit break down over a burst pipe. He didn't know it yet, but this emergency call would shatter the careful loneliness he'd spent years perfecting. Within 18 hours, she'd be standing on his porch with a suitcase, asking to stay. Within 3 weeks, his empty house would feel like home again. And within 2 months, he'd have to decide if he was brave enough to let someone matter. Before we dive into how a single leak changed 2 lives forever, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and stick around till the end, because what happens when she has to choose between her old life and their new one, you won't see it coming. The river didn't care that it was 3 in the morning. Caleb Turner sat on the sagging porch of his inherited house, watching the Willamette's dark surface catch fragments of moonlight between the clouds. Rain drummed against the metal roof in that particular rhythm that meant the gutter on the east side was clogged again. Another repair he'd been putting off for weeks. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept the cup between his palms anyway, feeling the ceramic leach warmth from his skin instead of giving it. 26 years old, and this was what passed for his Friday night. The house behind him was a 1960s ranch-style affair, all weathered cedar siding and windows that whistled when the wind came off the water. His grandfather had built it with his own hands, back when this stretch of riverbank was considered too far from downtown Portland to be worth anything. Now developers circled the neighborhood like vultures, leaving glossy business cards in his mailbox with phrases like cash offer and as-is condition printed in fonts that cost more than his truck. Caleb never called them back. It wasn't sentiment exactly, though he had memories here, summer afternoons fishing off the dock with his grandfather, the old man's patient hands teaching him how to thread a hook, how to read the water's surface for the promise of what moved beneath. But sentiment didn't explain why he stayed in a house too big for one person, why he woke up at dawn to a master bedroom he never used, preferring the smaller guest room that didn't echo quite so much. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He had nowhere else he wanted to be. His phone buzzed against the porch railing, the screen lighting up with a number he didn't recognize. Caleb stared at it through 2 full rings before answering. Emergency calls after midnight were either drunk friends who'd lost their keys or pipes that had decided to burst at the worst possible moment. Either way, they paid the same. Turner Plumbing. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Oh, thank God. The woman on the other end sounded like she was trying to maintain composure and failing. I'm so sorry to call this late, but I found your card in my building's emergency directory, and there's water everywhere, and the building super isn't answering, and I have a presentation in 4 hours. Ma'am, Caleb cut through her spiral gently. Where are you located? The Montgomery, Unit 4207. She paused. Do you know it? He did. The Montgomery was one of those glass luxury towers that had sprouted downtown like expensive weeds, all floor-to-ceiling windows and amenities that came with price tags he couldn't imagine. The kind of place where the doorman wore a better suit than Caleb owned. I can be there in 30 minutes, he said, already standing, already reaching for his keys. What's your name? Evelyn? Evelyn Moore. All right, Evelyn, stop the water at the main shutoff valve if you can find it. Should be in a cabinet somewhere, probably kitchen or bathroom. I'm on my way. He ended the call and stood for a moment in the rain, letting it soak through his flannel shirt while he decided whether to change. The clean work shirt was still in the dryer from yesterday's job. The spare was somewhere in the bedroom, probably wrinkled. He grabbed his tool bag instead and decided the flannel would have to do. The truck started on the second try, better than usual. Caleb pulled out onto the empty road, windshield wipers beating time against the downpour. At this hour, the city belonged to delivery drivers and insomniacs, their headlights carving tunnels through the rain. He drove in silence, radio off, listening to the engine's familiar rattle and the white noise of water against metal. Downtown rose ahead like a circuit board, all lit windows and steel frames. The Montgomery occupied a prime corner, its facade a statement in glass and ambition. Caleb pulled into the underground garage, noting the Tesla charging stations and the reserved spots marked with names instead of numbers. His truck looked like something that had wandered in from a different century. The elevator to the 42nd floor had mirrors on 3 sides, and played music so smooth it felt like an apology. Caleb caught his reflection, flannel shirt dark with rain, jeans torn at the knee from crawling under a sink last week, work boots that had given up being waterproof years ago. He looked exactly like what he was, a guy who fixed things for people who could afford not to know how things worked. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like new carpet and money. Unit 4207 was at the end, its door already cracked open, warm light spilling into the corridor. Caleb knocked twice and pushed inside. "In here!" The voice came from somewhere to the left. He followed the sound and the sound of running water into the most aggressively minimalist apartment he'd ever seen. Everything was white or gray or that particular shade of beige that expensive people called greige. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city sprawling out below like scattered diamonds. The furniture looked like it had been selected by someone who'd never sat down in their life. And standing in the doorway to the bathroom, barefoot in a suit that probably cost more than his mortgage payment, was Evelyn Moore. She was somewhere in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun that was starting to come apart and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. Her blouse had water stains spreading across the silk, and she held a soaked towel in both hands like she'd been trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. It just burst," she said, gesturing helplessly at the bathroom. "I was brushing my teeth, and suddenly there's water shooting out of the wall, and I tried to stop it, but it's okay." Caleb moved past her into the bathroom, assessing the damage. The vanity pipe had given up completely. The connection joint corroded through. Water was indeed everywhere, pooling on the marble tile, soaking into what looked like very expensive bath mats, spreading toward the bedroom with single-minded determination. He dropped his tool bag and went to work. The main shutoff was behind a panel he had to unscrew. Whoever designed these luxury units had clearly never considered that someone might need to access their plumbing in a hurry. Caleb killed the water and the gushing stopped, leaving only the drip, drip, drip of residual drainage and Evelyn's quiet breathing behind him. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Fixable." Caleb sat back on his heels, examining the burst joint. "Connection corroded through. Happens sometimes with cheaper fittings, even in expensive places." He glanced back at her. "Actually, especially in expensive places. Contractors cut corners where people can't see. Can you fix it tonight?" "I can patch it so you have water again. Proper fix will need new parts, probably tomorrow afternoon." He pulled out his wrench. "But you'll be able to use your bathroom in about 20 minutes. She sagged against the doorframe like he'd just told her she'd won the lottery. While Caleb worked, he became aware of the apartment's silence. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of silence that came from spaces that were lived in alone. No photographs on the walls, no clutter on the kitchen counter, no shoes kicked off by the door, just expensive furniture arranged in a way that looked professionally staged. "You live here alone?" he asked, then immediately regretted it. None of his business. But Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes." A pause. "Is it that obvious?" "Just quiet." "I'm never here," she said, and something in her voice made Caleb glance up. She was looking out those massive windows at the city below, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I bought this place 3 years ago. Felt like an achievement, you know. Corner unit, 42nd floor, views of everything." She laughed, but it didn't sound happy. "I think I've cooked in that kitchen maybe 6 times. Caleb tightened the coupling, testing the connection. "What do you do? For work, I mean." "Strategy consulting, which is a fancy way of saying I tell companies how to fire people more efficiently." She turned from the window. "What about you? Is it just you or do you work for a company?" "Just me. Turner Plumbing. I'm Turner." He twisted the pipe, checking for leaks. "Inherited the business from my grandfather. Well, inherited the reputation and the tools. Built the business myself, I guess." "Do you like it?" The question caught him off guard. Most people asked if it paid well, or if he was busy, transactional questions that required simple answers. Nobody asked if he liked it. "Yeah," he said slowly, "I do. Things break, I fix them. Start of the day, there's a problem. End of the day, there's not. It's..." He searched for the word. "Concrete." "I can't remember the last time I fixed something," Evelyn said quietly. Caleb turned the water back on, watching the connection hold. No leaks, no drips. "All right, you're back in business. But seriously, get someone to replace this whole assembly tomorrow. I can do it, or I can give you a list of people if you want quotes. You. The answer came quickly. I'd rather have someone I know won't cut corners. He nodded, packing his tools. I'll come by around 2 if that works. Perfect. She walked him to the door, and for a moment they stood in the threshold, the apartment's aggressive luxury behind her, the neutral hallway ahead. Thank you. Really. I know it's late, and you probably had better things to do. I really didn't, Caleb said, surprising himself with his honesty. Was just sitting on my porch watching the rain. Evelyn tilted her head. That sounds nice, actually. Does it? More than you'd think. She leaned against the doorframe, and exhaustion settled over her features like a mask being removed. I can't remember the last time I just sat somewhere. Without my phone, without emails, without the next thing I'm supposed to be doing crawling up my spine. Caleb shifted his tool bag to his other hand. The professional thing to do was leave, job done, invoice to follow, see you tomorrow at 2. But something in her face, and that particular species of loneliness that he recognized from his own mirror, kept him standing there. You ever think about taking a break? He asked. Just stepping away for a minute? All the time. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Never do it, though. There's always another meeting, another deadline, another crisis that only I can handle. She paused. Until my bathroom pipe bursts at 3 in the morning, and I realize I don't even know how to turn off my own water. That's why you pay people like me. He meant it as a joke, but it came out gentler than he intended. Right. Evelyn straightened, pulling her professional mask back on like a suit jacket. Well, thank you again. I'll see you tomorrow at 2. Tomorrow at 2, Caleb confirmed. He was halfway to the elevator when she called out, Hey, Turner? He turned back. She was still standing in her doorway, this woman in her expensive suit in her expensive apartment that felt like a very beautiful prison. That porch of yours, she said. If I ever need somewhere quiet to watch the rain, would that invitation extend beyond emergency plumbing? Caleb didn't know what made him say it. Maybe the rain, maybe the hour, maybe the recognition of something broken that couldn't be fixed with a wrench. Doors always open. She smiled, a real one this time. Careful. I might take you up on that. I hope you do, he said, and realized he meant it. The elevator ride down felt different than the ride up. The mirrors still showed him the same rain-soaked plumber with the torn jeans, but something in his reflection had shifted. The building's security guard nodded at him on the way out, and Caleb found himself nodding back, his tool bag somehow lighter than before. The drive home took him through a city that was starting to wake up. Early morning joggers braved the rain, and the first commuters began filling the roads. By the time Caleb pulled into his driveway, the sky had shifted from black to that deep blue that came before dawn. The house waited for him, patient and dark. He stood on the porch for a moment before going inside, looking at the space with fresh eyes. When was the last time he'd had anyone over? Real friends, not just clients he'd done work for who happened to be friendly. When was the last time the living room had been anything other than a space he walked through on his way to somewhere else? Inside, Caleb moved through the familiar routine. Tools cleaned and put away, wet clothes swapped for dry, a fresh pot of coffee brewing because sleep was a distant country he wouldn't reach now. But as he sat at his grandfather's old kitchen table, watching light creep across the river, he found himself thinking about Evelyn's question. Do you like it? The honest answer was more complicated than yes. He liked the work, the problem solving, the satisfaction of making something broken whole again. He liked being his own boss, setting his own hours, answering to no one but his clients and his conscience. But the life that had built up around the work, the empty house, the solo meals, the weekends that stretched like deserts with nothing to mark them but repairs and routines, that was harder to like. That was just what happened when you let enough time pass without making different choices. Caleb pulled out his phone and looked at the contact information Evelyn had given him when he'd written up the invoice. Evelyn Moore, strategy consultant, the Montgomery Unit, 4207. He added a note to his calendar. 2 p.m. Fix bathroom pipe properly. Then, because something reckless had woken up in him during that 3 a.m. conversation, he added, doors always open. The day unfolded in its usual pattern. Caleb slept for a few hours, woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the curtains, and checked his phone for new jobs. 2 calls. A clogged drain on the east side, a water heater making concerning noises in Selwood. He took both, grateful for the distraction. The work was good. Straightforward problems with clear solutions. The kind of thing he could fix without thinking too hard, letting muscle memory guide his hands while his mind wandered to places it probably shouldn't go. Like whether Evelyn had been serious about the porch. Like whether he'd been serious about letting her sit on it. Like whether any of it mattered. Because people said things at 3 a.m. that they never meant in daylight. By 1:30, he was cleaned up and heading back downtown, new pipe fittings and proper sealant in his passenger seat. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. The Montgomery looked different in daylight, less like a monument and more like what it was. Just another building where people lived their lives, expensive or otherwise. Evelyn answered her door in jeans and a sweater, her hair down around her shoulders, and for a moment Caleb didn't recognize her. This version looked younger, less armored, more like someone who might actually take you up on an offer to sit on a broken porch and watch the rain. "You look different," he said, then immediately felt stupid. But she just smiled. "So do you. The flannel's gone." Professional standards. He'd actually changed 3 times before settling on his newest work shirt, the one without any stains. "Ready to get this pipe sorted properly?" "Please, I've been paranoid about using the bathroom all day." The repair took longer than the emergency patch. Caleb replaced the entire assembly, checking connections 3 times because something about Evelyn watching him work made him more careful than usual. She didn't hover exactly, but she stayed nearby, asking questions about the process that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "So the threads actually create the seal?" she asked, watching him apply pipe dope. "Partly. The compound helps, but yeah, it's the threading doing most of the work. Basic physics, force distributed over surface area creates pressure. Pressure creates seal. I went to business school for 4 years and learned nothing that useful," Evelyn said dryly. Caleb glanced up at her. "You know how to fire people efficiently. That's something." "That's depressing is what that is." She leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong life? Like you took a left turn somewhere when you should have gone right, and now you're so far down the road you can't figure out how to get back?" The question hung in the air between them, too honest for a casual afternoon repair call. Caleb sat back considering his answer. "Sometimes. But I think maybe there's no right life. Just the one you're living, and whether you can make peace with it." "Have you? Made peace with it?" "Working on it." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I bought this apartment because it was everything I thought I wanted. Success, status, the view from the top." She gestured at the windows, the city spread below them. "And now I spend 14-hour days at the office, so I don't have to come home and feel how empty it is." "Evelyn, sorry." She shook her head. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You came here to fix a pipe, not listen to my existential crisis." "I don't mind," Caleb said quietly. "For what it's worth." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, of the particular species of loneliness they both carried. "That offer," Evelyn said carefully, "about the porch. Were you serious?" Caleb's hand stilled on the wrench. "Yeah, I was. Even though I'm basically a stranger who called you at 3 a.m. Maybe that's exactly why." He tightened the final connection, testing it one more time. "Everyone I know, I've known too long. They all have ideas about who I'm supposed to be. It's tiring." "I understand that more than you know." Caleb stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "All right, you're all set. New assembly, proper sealant, should last you 10 years easy. But seriously, if you have any problems, call me. Don't wait for another 3 a.m. disaster." "I won't." Evelyn walked him to the door again, and again they stood in that threshold moment, the space between staying and leaving. "Turner?" "Caleb," he said. "You can call me Caleb." "Caleb." She tried it out, and he liked the way it sounded in her voice. "About that porch. What if I wanted to take you up on it? Like, actually? His heart did something complicated in his chest. Then I'd say come by whenever. I'm usually home by 6, unless there's an emergency. Tomorrow? The word came out half hopeful, half terrified. Tomorrow works. I don't know what we do. I'm terrible at small talk. We could just sit, Caleb offered. Watch the river. You don't have to be good at anything. Something in Evelyn's expression cracked open. Relief, maybe, at the permission to be less than perfect. Okay, tomorrow. I'll bring wine or something. Just bring yourself, he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in months. The drive home felt like floating. Caleb kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to wake up and find out the entire afternoon had been some kind of sleep-deprived hallucination. But the invoice on his passenger seat was real. Evelyn's contact information was still in his phone, and tomorrow at 6 she was going to show up at his door. If she actually came. People said a lot of things they didn't mean. Especially people like Evelyn, whose lives ran on calendars and obligations and carefully managed expectations. By tomorrow, she'd probably remember she had a conference call or a dinner meeting or any of the 1,000 things that filled up the lives of people who lived in corner units with 42nd floor views. Caleb tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what led to disappointment. But as he pulled into his driveway and looked at his shabby, beloved house with its sagging porch and clogged gutters, he found himself wondering what Evelyn would see when she looked at it. Would she see what the developers saw? A teardown, a waste of valuable riverfront property? Or would she see what his grandfather had built? A place where someone could make a life, quiet and small and real? He spent the rest of the afternoon in a cleaning frenzy he hadn't experienced since his last girlfriend had left. Dishes washed, floors swept, the porch cleared of the accumulated debris of bachelor living. He unclogged the gutter, fixed the wobbly railing, even hauled out the old rocking chair from the garage and gave it a new coat of stain. It was probably too much. She probably wasn't coming, but if she did come, at least his house wouldn't look like the before picture in a home renovation show. That night, Caleb sat on his newly cleaned porch with a beer he didn't drink, watching the river catch the last of the sunset. The city lights began to blink on across the water, and somewhere among them was the Montgomery. And inside the Montgomery was Evelyn Moore, maybe thinking about tomorrow, maybe already planning her excuse for why she couldn't make it. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Still okay for tomorrow? I'm having second thoughts. Not about coming, about whether I'm weird for wanting to sit on a stranger's porch. Caleb stared at the message, at this small proof that she was thinking about it too, that whatever this was, it wasn't just in his head. He typed back, "Not weird. Or if it is, we can be weird together. See you at 6. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "See you at 6. Caleb set his phone down and let himself hope. The next day crawled by with the specific torture of anticipated waiting. Every job took twice as long as it should have. Every client wanted to chat. The traffic was worse than usual. The weather was wrong. His truck made a new noise that probably meant something expensive was about to break. By 5:30, Caleb was home, showered, changed, and trying very hard not to pace. He'd put out 2 chairs on the porch, angled so they faced the river but could also facilitate conversation. There was beer in the fridge, coffee in the pot, and a package of cookies he'd bought on impulse and immediately regretted because who serves cookies to a sophisticated consultant who lives in a luxury tower? At 5:45, a car pulled into his driveway. Not Evelyn, too early, and the car was wrong. Some kind of sedan that had seen better decades. But then the door opened and Evelyn stepped out, and Caleb's heart did that complicated thing again. She was wearing jeans and a jacket that looked expensive but worn in, carrying a bottle of wine and her own uncertainty like visible weights. She stood by her car for a moment, looking at the house, and Caleb wondered what she saw, if it measured up to whatever she'd imagined. He opened the door before she could knock. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." Evelyn held up the wine like an offering. "Changed my mind 4 times on the drive over." "What made you come anyway?" She met his eyes. "I realized I couldn't remember the last time I wanted to be somewhere. Actually wanted to, Not had to or should or was expected to. That felt like something worth not chickening out on. Caleb stepped back, gesturing her inside. Welcome to the house that won't impress anyone. But Evelyn walked through his living room like she was touring a museum, taking in the worn furniture, the fishing photos on the walls, the bookshelf with its collection of repair manuals and novels he'd read too many times. She stopped at the window that overlooked the river, the view so different from her 42nd floor panorama, closer, quieter, more intimate. It's perfect, she said softly. It's a mess. It's lived in. She turned to face him. There's a difference. They ended up on the porch as the sun set, 2 chairs and 2 people and the river rolling past in the gathering dark. Evelyn had brought a nice wine that they drank from the only glasses Caleb owned that weren't promotional items from the hardware store. They talked about nothing important, favorite books, worst jobs, the best meal they'd ever eaten, whether the river froze in winter. But beneath the small talk ran a current of something else, something that felt like 2 people slowly learning they could take up space in each other's presence without having to perform or pretend. Can I tell you something? Evelyn said, after her second glass of wine had loosened something in her carefully maintained composure. I'm so tired of being successful. Caleb waited, sensing she needed to say more. Everyone thinks I have it all figured out. Corner office, designer apartment, salary that sounds like a typo, and I do have those things. But I wake up every morning and think, is this it? Is this what I spent my whole life working toward? She stared at her wine. And then I feel guilty for being ungrateful, because there are people who'd kill for what I have. Having something doesn't mean it's right for you, Caleb said quietly. When did you figure that out? Still working on it. He leaned back in his chair. But I know I'd rather have this. He gestured at the porch, the river, the quiet, than something bigger that doesn't feel like mine. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You're different from anyone I know. Good different or weird different? Honest different. She set down her glass. Everyone I work with, we're all performing all the time. Performing success, performing confidence, performing like we have our lives together. You don't perform. Too tired for that, Caleb admitted. Life's hard enough without pretending it's something it's not. They sat in comfortable silence as full dark settled over the river. The city lights reflected on the water's surface, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle carried across the night. I should probably go, Evelyn said, but she didn't move. You could stay a while longer, if you wanted. I want to. She stood anyway. But I have an early meeting, and if I'm too tired, I'll say something career-limiting to someone who doesn't deserve it. Caleb walked her to her car, hands in his pockets to keep from doing something stupid like reaching for her. You can come back. Whenever. The porch isn't going anywhere. Evelyn paused with her hand on the car door. Would it be weird if I came back tomorrow? Would it be weird if I said I hoped you would? She smiled. That real smile he'd seen once before. The one that made her look like someone who hadn't forgotten how to be happy. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Caleb stood in his driveway and watched her taillights disappear down the road. The house behind him felt different now. Less empty. More like it was waiting for something. Or someone. He went inside and didn't bother cleaning up the wine glasses right away. There was something good about the evidence of her presence, proof that the evening had been real. His phone buzzed. Thank you for tonight. I didn't realize how much I needed that. He typed back. Me too. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb went to bed feeling like tomorrow was something to look forward to instead of just another day to get through. Tomorrow came, and the day after that, and the day after that. Evelyn started showing up at his door 3, 4, 5 evenings a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat. She told him about the job she was starting to hate, the promotion she wasn't sure she wanted, the life she'd built that was starting to feel like a cage made of her own ambition. He told her about the grandfather who'd taught him everything, the relationships that had faded because he could never quite figure out how to let people in, the business he'd built that kept him busy but not fulfilled. 2 weeks in, she fell asleep on his couch during a movie, and Caleb covered her with a blanket instead of waking her. She found him the next morning making coffee in his kitchen, and neither of them mentioned how natural it felt, her being there. 3 weeks in, they repaired the dock together, and she learned the satisfaction of hitting a nail straight, of building something with her own hands instead of managing people who managed people who did the actual work. 4 weeks in, Caleb realized he'd stopped thinking of his house as empty, and Evelyn realized she'd stopped dreading going home at night, because more and more this shabby house by the river felt more like home than her expensive apartment ever had. Neither of them named what was happening. Naming it felt dangerous, like it might break the spell. They were just two lonely people who'd found something comfortable in each other's company. That was all. That was everything. But storms don't ask permission before they come. And the one brewing on Evelyn's horizon was about to test whether what they'd built was strong enough to survive the flood. The morning Evelyn showed up with a suitcase was a Saturday in late October, the kind of gray sky morning where the river and the clouds seemed to bleed into each other until there was no horizon, just varying shades of pewter and mist. Caleb was replacing the floorboards on his porch, a project he'd been putting off for 2 years, but suddenly felt urgent now that someone other than himself actually used the space. He had 3 boards up, nails sorted by size, and was measuring the gap for the 4th when he heard tires on gravel. He looked up expecting the mail carrier or maybe his neighbor asking to borrow tools. Instead, he saw Evelyn's sedan pulling into his driveway at 8 in the morning on a weekend, which was wrong for several reasons. The most obvious being that she was supposed to be in Seattle for a conference. She got out of the car slowly, like her body was moving through water, and Caleb saw she was still wearing yesterday's clothes, the same silk blouse and slacks she'd had on when she'd stopped by Thursday evening. Her hair had escaped its usual perfect arrangement, and there were shadows under her eyes that looked like bruises. Then she opened the back door and pulled out a suitcase. Caleb set down his hammer and stood up, his knees protesting from the hour he'd spent crouched on the porch. "Evelyn?" She walked toward him with the suitcase trailing behind her like a reluctant dog, and when she got close enough for him to see her face properly, he realized she'd been crying. Not recently, the tears had dried hours ago, but the evidence lingered in the set of her jaw, the redness around her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice scraped raw. "I know this is crazy. I know we've only known each other a month, and you probably have plans, and I should have called first, but..." She stopped, struggling with words. "Can I stay here? Just for a few days? I'll pay rent. I'll stay out of your way. I can't go back to that apartment. Not right now." Caleb took the suitcase from her hand without a word and carried it inside. He set it down in the living room and turned to find Evelyn still standing in the doorway, like she needed explicit permission to cross the threshold. The morning light behind her turned her into a silhouette, all sharp edges and uncertainty. "Coffee?" he asked. She nodded and finally stepped inside, closing the door behind her with the soft click of something final. Caleb moved through the familiar routine of brewing coffee while Evelyn sat at his kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her like a student waiting for the principal. He didn't push, didn't ask questions, just set a mug in front of her and took the chair across from her, waiting. "I quit," Evelyn said finally. "Last night, in the middle of the Seattle conference, I quit my job." Caleb waited for more. "They wanted me to lead a restructuring project, 1,500 people across 4 divisions. My job would be to determine who was essential and who was expendable, to make it sound strategic instead of what it actually was, destroying lives to improve a profit margin by 2%. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug but didn't drink. And I was sitting in this conference room with views of the Space Needle, listening to the VP talk about optimizing human capital, and I just broke. What did you do? I stood up, told them I was done optimizing human beings like they were machines, and walked out. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Very dramatic. Very unprofessional. Probably destroyed any chance of a decent reference. Good, Caleb said. Evelyn looked up at him, surprised. I mean it. That job was eating you alive. Every time you came here, you looked a little more exhausted, a little more like you were holding yourself together with wire and willpower. He leaned back in his chair. So you quit. That takes guts. It was stupid. I have a mortgage on that apartment, student loans, car payments. I have a reputation, a career trajectory, a 5-year plan. Her voice cracked. Had, past tense. So what made you come here instead of going home? Evelyn stared into her coffee like it might have answers. I drove back from Seattle at midnight, got to my apartment around 3, stood in my living room and looked at all that expensive furniture, all those carefully chosen pieces that were supposed to represent success, and I felt nothing. No relief at being home, no comfort, no sense of belonging. Just this crushing awareness that I'd spent 3 years living in a space that never felt like mine. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. And then I thought about your porch, about sitting there watching the river while you fixed something or cooked dinner or just existed without performing success every second. And I realized that this broken down house by the river felt more like home after a month than my apartment ever did. So you came here. So I came here. She wiped at her eyes impatiently. Without calling, without asking, showing up at 8 a.m. with a suitcase like some kind of disaster refugee. You're not a refugee, Caleb said quietly. You're someone who made a hard choice and needed somewhere to land. That's allowed. Is it? The question came out raw, because I feel like I just blew up my entire life on impulse, and now I'm dragging you into the wreckage. Caleb stood up and refilled both their coffee mugs, using the time to organize his thoughts. When he sat back down, he chose his words carefully. 6 weeks ago, you called me at 3 in the morning because your pipe burst. You could have called any plumber in Portland. You called me. Why? Evelyn frowned, caught off guard by the question. Your card was in the building directory. There were 5 cards in that directory. I checked. He had checked later, curious about the competition. So why me? I don't know. Your card looked honest, I guess. No fancy logo, no promises about being the best or the cheapest. Just Turner Plumbing and a phone number. It felt real. That's why you're here now, Caleb said. Not because you're dragging me into anything, but because you know I'll be honest with you. So here's honest. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you quit that job that was killing you. I'm glad you're sitting in my kitchen instead of that apartment that felt like a museum. And yeah, it's fast, and yeah, it's probably crazy, but he met her eyes. I'd rather have crazy and real than sensible and fake. Something in Evelyn's expression shifted. The tight control she'd been maintaining cracked, and tears spilled over before she could stop them. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody does, Caleb said. That's the secret they don't tell you. Everyone's just making it up as they go. She laughed through the tears, a wet, broken sound that somehow felt like a beginning. Can I really stay? Just for a few days, until I figure out what's next? Stay as long as you need. He stood up. Guest room's yours. It's not fancy. I don't want fancy, Evelyn interrupted. I want real, remember? Then welcome home, Caleb said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in his life. The first day had the awkward quality of 2 people learning to share space they'd only ever occupied separately. Evelyn unpacked her suitcase in the guest room while Caleb went back to replacing porch boards, giving her room to breathe. She emerged an hour later in jeans and an old college sweatshirt he'd never seen before, looking younger and more uncertain than the polished consultant who used to show up at his door. What can I do? She asked. Caleb looked up from his measuring tape. You don't have to do anything. You just quit your job. Take a break. I don't know how to take a break. I'll just sit there thinking about what I did, second-guessing everything, spiraling into panic. She gestured at the torn-up porch. Put me to work, please. So he did. They spent the morning replacing floorboards, Caleb teaching her how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel when a nail was seated properly, how to check if boards were level. Evelyn was terrible at it initially. Her first cut was 3 inches off, and she bent more nails than she sank, but she kept at it with the same fierce determination she'd probably applied to business school. This is harder than it looks, she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. Most things are. Caleb lined up another board. But you're getting better. That last one was almost straight. Almost straight, the highest praise. In carpentry, almost straight is pretty good for a first-timer. They worked in comfortable silence, broken by questions and instructions, and Caleb found himself enjoying teaching someone something with his hands instead of just fixing problems alone. Evelyn asked good questions. Why this angle instead of that one? Why certain wood types mattered? How his grandfather had learned all this. He taught himself mostly. Caleb said, hammering in a nail. Built this house from the foundation up. Took him 3 years working nights and weekends. My grandmother thought he was crazy. Was he? Probably, but it lasted, still here 50 years later. He sat back to admire their progress. Can't say that about most things people build. Evelyn ran her hand over the new boards, feeling the smooth wood grain. There's something satisfying about this. Making something real, something that'll last. Better than optimizing human capital. She smiled. So much better. By lunch, they'd replaced half the porch, and Evelyn had splinters in 3 fingers and a sense of accomplishment that showed in the way she stood straighter, smiled easier. Caleb made sandwiches while she washed up, and they ate on the newly repaired section of porch, surveying their work. Thank you, Evelyn said quietly, for not making this weird, for not asking 1,000 questions about what I'm doing or what my plan is. Do you have a plan? Not even a little bit. She took a bite of her sandwich. I should be terrified. I am terrified, but also lighter? Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot it was there, and now it's gone. That's the weight of living someone else's idea of success, Caleb said. It's heavy. What's your idea of success? He considered the question while watching the river flow past. Waking up and wanting to be in the day ahead of you, going to bed feeling like you spent your time on things that mattered. Having people in your life who know you as you actually are, not who you're trying to be. He glanced at her. Not very ambitious. It sounds impossibly hard, actually, Evelyn said. I've spent so long being who I thought I should be that I'm not sure I know who I actually am anymore. Then maybe that's what you figure out next. That afternoon, while Caleb went to handle an emergency call, a water heater threatening to flood someone's basement, Evelyn explored the house properly. She'd been here dozens of times over the past month, but always as a visitor, always maintaining the invisible boundary between guest and resident. Now she moved through the rooms differently, noticing things she'd overlooked before. The bookshelf in the living room held an eclectic mix. Repair manuals next to Cormac McCarthy novels next to a collection of poetry that looked well read. The kitchen had good knives, but no matching dishes. The bathroom still had his grandfather's old medicine cabinet, the mirror spotted with age. The master bedroom was what surprised her most. Caleb had mentioned he didn't use it, preferring the smaller guest room, but she'd assumed that was temporary, a quirk of bachelor living. Standing in the doorway, she understood it was something else. The room was frozen in time, not dusty or neglected, but preserved. The furniture was older than the rest of the house, the bed covered with a quilt that had been made by hand. Photographs on the dresser showed a couple she recognized from other pictures around the house. Caleb's grandparents, young and in love, then older, still together. The last photo showed them on this very porch, his grandfather's arm around his grandmother's shoulders, both of them smiling at whoever held the camera. Evelyn left the room quietly, understanding now why Caleb chose the smaller space. Some rooms held too many ghosts to sleep in comfortably. She was making coffee when he returned, his shirt soaked from the water heater disaster. You're domestic now? He teased, heading for the stairs to change. I'm justifying my existence through useful tasks, she called after him. There's a difference. When he came back down in dry clothes, she had coffee poured and was examining his refrigerator with the critical eye of someone who'd survived on takeout for 3 years. When did you last go grocery shopping? She asked. Define grocery shopping. Caleb. I buy things when I run out, that counts. Evelyn turned to face him, hands on her hips. You have condiments, beer, and what I think used to be lettuce. That's not groceries. That's a cry for help. I eat fine. You eat like a college student whose mother stopped packing his lunch. My mother died when I was 12, Caleb said mildly. So that tracks. Evelyn's face went soft with apology. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's fine. He waved off her concern. It was a long time ago, and you're right about the groceries. I'm terrible at keeping food in the house. Then let me do it. The words came out before she could think them through. I mean, if I'm staying here, I should contribute. You won't let me pay rent. Definitely not. So let me handle food, groceries, cooking, making sure we both eat something that doesn't come from a drive-thru. Caleb leaned against the counter, studying her. You know how to cook? I went to Le Cordon Bleu for a summer in college. At his raised eyebrow, she shrugged. I thought I wanted to be a chef. Before I decided I wanted to be rich and important. How'd that work out for you? I'm standing in your kitchen unemployed with splinters in my fingers, so you tell me. He smiled. All right, you handle food, but I'm helping. I'm not completely useless in the kitchen. Deal. They went to the grocery store together that evening, and Caleb discovered that shopping with Evelyn was an experience. She moved through the aisles with the same focused intensity she'd probably applied to corporate strategy, selecting ingredients with care, explaining what she planned to make and why these tomatoes were better than those ones. You're very serious about produce, he observed. Food is the one thing I know how to do properly, she said, weighing bell peppers in her hand. Let me have this. They filled the cart with more fresh vegetables than Caleb had purchased in the entire past year, along with good bread, real butter, spices he couldn't pronounce, and a bottle of wine that cost more than he usually spent on groceries in a week. This is too much, he protested when she reached for aged balsamic vinegar. It's not too much, it's enough. She put the bottle in the cart. Trust me. Back at the house, Evelyn took over his kitchen with the confidence of someone who actually knew what they were doing. She put Caleb to work chopping onions, smaller than that, while she seasoned chicken and prepared vegetables with efficient grace. Where'd you learn all this? He asked, wiping tears from the onions. My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died. Evelyn's hands stilled for a moment. Car accident when I was 8. She was this tiny Italian woman who believed food was love made visible, and she taught me that cooking for someone was the most honest thing you could do for them. I didn't know about your parents. We're a matched set, aren't we? Both orphans raised by grandparents. She resumed her chopping. Mine died right before I graduated college, left me enough money for business school and a note that said, "Make me proud." So I did. Or tried to. I think she'd be proud of you quitting that job, Caleb said quietly. Evelyn looked up at him, surprised. Anyone can chase money and status, he continued. Takes real courage to walk away when something's wrong, even if you don't know what's right yet. You didn't even know me a month ago, Evelyn said. How do you know what's right for me? I don't. But I know what I see when you talk about your job, or talked about it, past tense. You looked like someone drowning who'd convinced herself she was swimming. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Dinner was better than anything Caleb had eaten in months. Chicken with herbs he couldn't identify. Roasted vegetables that tasted nothing like the soggy frozen ones he usually microwaved. Bread still warm from the oven that Evelyn had somehow made while he wasn't paying attention. This is incredible, he said around a mouthful. It's just chicken. It's not just chicken. I don't know what you did to this chicken, but it's not just chicken. Evelyn smiled, and Caleb realized it was the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her all day. My grandmother would have liked you. She always said the highest compliment you could give a cook was to stop talking and keep eating. So he did. After dinner, they cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying, putting away dishes in cabinets that Evelyn was already learning. The kitchen felt different with two people in it, warmer, more alive, like it had been waiting for this. They ended up on the porch as the sun set, a routine that had become habit without either of them noticing. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Evelyn's suitcase was upstairs in the guest room. Tonight, this wasn't a visit. This was staying. Are you freaking out yet? Evelyn asked. About having an unemployed woman you barely know living in your house? We've known each other 6 weeks. That's not barely. 6 weeks is nothing. 6 weeks is 6 weeks, Caleb said. I know you take your coffee black. I know you hate your phone but can't stop checking it. I know you cry during sad commercials but pretend you don't. I know you're scared of being ordinary and terrified of being alone. That's not nothing. Evelyn turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. I know you still sleep in the guest room because the master bedroom belonged to your grandparents, and it feels wrong to change it. I know you work too hard because staying busy is easier than sitting still. I know you're kind to everyone except yourself. I know you build walls with space instead of words, keeping people at arm's length by being endlessly helpful without ever needing help back. I don't... Caleb started, then stopped. Okay, maybe I do that. So we both have our things. She pulled her knees up to her chest. Question is, can two broken people share a house without breaking it further? I don't think you're broken, Caleb said. I think you're becoming. Becoming what? Someone new. Someone who makes choices based on what feels right instead of what looks good on paper. Evelyn rested her chin on her knees. That's generous. Most people would say I'm having a breakdown. Most people are idiots. She laughed, surprised. You don't talk like a plumber. How do plumbers talk? I don't know. Less philosophically? We spend a lot of time alone with our thoughts, Caleb said. Pipes don't talk back. Gives you space to think. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the river. Caleb found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the sound of her breathing, the way she wrapped her arms around her knees, the fact that she was here, really here, not just visiting, but staying. I should probably let my assistant know I'm not coming back, Evelyn said eventually, and my landlord, and my... She stopped. I don't know who else. That's sad, isn't it? 6 weeks ago, I would have had a list of people to notify. Now I can't think of anyone who'd actually care beyond the professional inconvenience. What about friends? I had work friends. We got drinks after conferences, complained about clients, networked strategically. But actual friends? People who knew me as more than my job title? She shook her head. I can't remember the last time I had one of those. You have one now, Caleb said quietly. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Is that what we are? Friends? I don't know what we are, he admitted. But whatever it is, it matters to me. You matter to me. Something shifted in the air between them, a charge that hadn't been there before, or maybe had always been there, and they were only now acknowledging it. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, seeming to decide against whatever she'd been about to say. I should go to bed, she said instead, standing up. It's been the longest day of my life. Guest room's all yours, extra blankets in the closet if you need them. Caleb, she paused in the doorway. Thank you. For all of this. For not making me explain myself or justify showing up with a suitcase. For just letting me be here. Any time, he said, and watched her disappear inside. Caleb sat alone on the porch for another hour, listening to the river and trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in his chest. He'd meant what he said. Evelyn mattered to him, but the exact nature of that mattering was getting harder to categorize as just friendship, or just kindness, or just two lonely people finding comfort in proximity. When he finally went inside, he could see light under the guest room door and hear the soft sound of Evelyn's voice, probably on the phone with her assistant or landlord, beginning the process of dismantling her old life. He lay in his own bed, the small guest room he'd claimed as his own years ago, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. The creak of floorboards overhead, the rush of water through pipes when she used the bathroom, the settling of the house around both of them. It should have felt intrusive. It felt like coming home. The next morning, Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and something baking. He came downstairs to find Evelyn in his kitchen wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her pajamas, flour on her nose, pulling muffins from the oven. You bake too? He asked from the doorway. She jumped, turning with a hand over her heart. Don't sneak up on me like that. It's my kitchen. It's our kitchen now. She said it without thinking, then froze. I mean, if that's okay, I'm not trying to take over. It's okay, Caleb interrupted. Our kitchen. I like the sound of that. Relief flooded her face. Good, because I stress bake, and you're going to have a lot of muffins in your near future. What are you stressed about? Everything. She set the muffin tin down. I called my landlord last night, gave notice on the apartment. I'm paid through the end of the month, but after that, she shrugged. I'll figure it out. You can stay here. Caleb, I can't just move in permanently. That's insane. Why? Because we barely know each other. Because I don't have a job. Because people don't just move in together after 6 weeks. Some people do, he said mildly, pouring himself coffee. And we know each other better than most people who've dated for 6 months. Besides, This house has too much space for one person. Always has. Evelyn studied him carefully. Are you saying this because you feel sorry for me? I'm saying this because I like having you here. Because the house feels right with you in it. Because... He paused, choosing honesty over safety. Because I've been alone for a long time, and I didn't realize how heavy that was until I wasn't alone anymore. She didn't answer immediately, just turned back to the muffins, using a knife to loosen them from the tin. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. What if this is a mistake? What if I'm running from my problems instead of solving them? Maybe running from something is the solution, Caleb offered. Not everything that chases us deserves to catch us. Evelyn turned around, a muffin in each hand, and for a moment they just looked at each other across his small kitchen. Her in his flannel shirt with flour on her nose, him in yesterday's jeans with coffee in his hand, both of them standing at the edge of something neither could name but both could feel. Okay, she said finally. I'll stay. For now. Until I figure out what's next. Good. Caleb took a muffin from her hand. Now, what's our plan for today? Our plan? You're stress baking at 7 a.m. That means you need a project or you'll spiral. So what are we doing? Evelyn considered this. The dock needs work. I noticed it's listing to one side. It's been listing for 2 years. Then it's time to fix it. She set her muffin down with determination. Teach me how to build something that'll last. So they spent the day repairing the dock, Caleb teaching Evelyn the basics of structural carpentry while she proved surprisingly adept at the physical work. She measured carefully, asked smart questions, and didn't complain when she smashed her thumb with the hammer. You're good at this, he said, watching her line up a board perfectly. I'm good at following instructions and applying myself obsessively to tasks. She hammered in a nail with 3 precise strikes. It's basically my only skill set. That's not true. Name another skill. You cook, you listen, you ask questions that make people actually think about their answers. He handed her another nail. You're honest, even when it's uncomfortable. You're brave enough to walk away from everything you built when you realized it wasn't right. Evelyn stopped hammering. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. That's what brave is. Doing the thing anyway. They worked until the sun started to set, then sat on their newly repaired dock with their feet dangling over the water, sharing a beer and watching the river catch the last light. I could get used to this, Evelyn said quietly. Manual labor and cheap beer? Days that feel real, work that shows results, coming home to someone who doesn't expect me to perform. You never have to perform here, Caleb said. Whatever you are, that's enough. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a casual gesture that felt monumental in its intimacy. What if I don't know what I am yet? Then we'll figure it out together. The days fell into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Evelyn handled the cooking and the grocery shopping, transforming Caleb's bachelor kitchen into something that smelled like garlic and fresh bread and possibilities. Caleb taught her about houses and repairs, about the satisfaction of fixing things with your hands, about the way physical work could quiet a restless mind. They painted the living room together, arguing good-naturedly about whether gray or beige was the right choice, compromising on something Evelyn called grage that Caleb pretended to understand. They replaced the light fixtures in the bathroom, planted bulbs that would bloom in spring, fixed the leak under the kitchen sink that Caleb had been ignoring for months. The house transformed around them, coming alive in ways Caleb hadn't realized it was dead. Evelyn brought plants that actually survived because someone remembered to water them. She hung curtains that matched and threw pillows that served no functional purpose but made the couch look intentional instead of accidental. She filled the empty spaces with small touches that said someone lived here instead of just existing between jobs. And Caleb, who'd been living in self-imposed exile for years, found himself adapting to her presence with shocking ease. He learned to check before walking around in his underwear. He started keeping the bathroom cleaner and buying the expensive coffee she preferred. He found himself looking forward to coming home instead of dreading the silence. But beneath the domestic comfort ran an undercurrent neither of them acknowledged. The growing awareness that this wasn't just roommates sharing space, wasn't just friends offering temporary shelter. This was something else, something neither quite knew how to name without risking everything they'd built. 3 weeks after Evelyn had shown up with her suitcase, Caleb came home to find her on the porch crying. He dropped his tool bag and crossed to her in 3 strides. "What happened? Are you okay?" She held up her phone. "My old boss called. They want me back. They're offering me a partnership, my own team, equity, everything I spent 5 years working toward." Caleb sat down slowly beside her. That's big. They said the project I walked out on fell apart without me. They need me back." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "And I told myself I was done with that world, that I'd moved past needing their validation. But hearing him say they need me, that I was right and they were wrong, you're tempted." "I'm terrified," she corrected, "because 3 weeks ago this would have been everything I wanted. Vindication, recognition, proof that I was valuable. But now—" She gestured helplessly at the house, the porch, the river. "Now I don't know if that life fits anymore." Caleb chose his words carefully. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it. They want an answer by Monday." She turned to face him. "What should I do?" "I can't answer that." "Why not?" "Because it's your life, Evelyn. Your choice. I can't tell you what to want." "But what do you want?" Her voice cracked on the question. "Do you want me to stay or go?" The honest answer lodged in his throat, too big and too true to speak out loud. He wanted her to stay. He wanted her to wake up in his house every morning and fill his kitchen with the smell of coffee and baked things. He wanted to keep teaching her about carpentry and learning from her about cooking. He wanted to keep falling asleep to the sound of her moving through rooms upstairs, keep waking up to evidence of her presence in his life. But wanting wasn't the same as saying, and saying might ruin everything. "I want you to be happy," he said finally. "Whatever that looks like." It was the safest answer and the most cowardly, and they both knew it. Evelyn stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need to think. I'm going for a walk." Caleb watched her disappear down the path toward town, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt empty again. She came back after dark, her hair damp from rain that had started while she was out. Caleb was in the kitchen, stress cooking a dinner he wasn't hungry for, trying not to imagine what the house would feel like if she left. "I'm not going," Evelyn said from the doorway. He turned around, spatula still in hand. "What?" "I'm not taking the job. I called them back and said no." She stepped into the kitchen. "Because you were right that first night on the porch. Having something doesn't mean it's right for you. And that life, the partnership, the equity, the validation, none of it felt right when I imagined going back to it." "Evelyn, let me finish." She held up a hand. "I know this is crazy. I know I don't have a plan, don't have a job, don't have any idea what I'm doing next. But I know that for the first time in my adult life, I wake up wanting to be in my day. And that's worth more than partnership." Caleb set down the spatula. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." She moved closer. "Are you okay with this? With me staying? Because I know this wasn't what you signed up for when I showed up with a suitcase." He crossed the distance between them and pulled her into a hug, cutting off her spiral. She stiffened for half a second, then melted into him, her arms coming around his waist, her face pressed against his shoulder. "I'm more than okay with it," he said quietly. "I'm grateful for it." They stood there in his kitchen, holding each other while dinner cooled on the stove, and neither one of them said what they were both thinking, that this had stopped being about friendship or convenience weeks ago, that something deeper had taken root in the space they'd created together. But saying it might break the spell, might force them to define something that worked better undefined. So they didn't say it, they just held on and let it be enough. For 3 weeks after Evelyn turned down the partnership, the house existed in a kind of golden suspension. November arrived with its characteristic Portland gloom, but inside the walls of Caleb's riverside home, something warm had taken root. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd lived together for years instead of weeks, anticipating needs before they were spoken, creating routines that felt inevitable rather than chosen. Evelyn started freelancing, small consulting projects for nonprofits that couldn't afford the big firms, work she could do from Caleb's kitchen table while he was out on calls. The money was a fraction of what she'd made before, But she came to dinner with stories about helping a community center optimize their budget instead of helping corporations eliminate jobs. And the difference showed in her face. Caleb found himself taking fewer evening calls, wanting to be home for the dinners she cooked, for the quiet hours on the porch watching the river darken. His business didn't suffer. If anything, his regulars commented that he seemed sharper, more present, like someone who had something to get back to. They were happy. Carefully, deliberately happy, in a way that felt fragile precisely because neither of them trusted it to last. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late November, while Evelyn was kneading bread dough and Caleb was replacing the washers in the kitchen sink. His phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and he almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had discovered his business line with annoying frequency. But something made him wipe his hands and pick up. "Is this Caleb Turner?" The voice was female, professional, with an edge of authority that immediately put him on guard. "Speaking." "Mr. Turner, this is Patricia Hendricks from Cascade Development Group. I'm calling about the property at 4127 River Road." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What about it?" "We've been acquiring parcels along this stretch of riverfront for a mixed-use development project. Your property is the last holdout in our acquisition zone, and we're prepared to make you a very generous offer." "Not interested," Caleb said flatly. "Mr. Turner, I understand attachment to family property, but I haven't told you the offer yet. We're prepared to pay $2.3 million for your lot. That's nearly 3 times the assessed value." The number hung in the air like a grenade. $2.3 million. Enough to buy a different house, start a different life, never worry about money again. "Still not interested," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I'm emailing you our proposal. Please review it before making a final decision. We're hoping to close all acquisitions by year-end, so we'll need your answer by December 15th. She paused. "That's a lot of money to turn down without at least looking at the details, Mr. Turner." She hung up before he could respond. Caleb stood in his kitchen, phone still in his hand, feeling like the floor had shifted beneath him. Evelyn had stopped kneading, her hands still buried in dough, watching him with concerned eyes. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "Developers. They want to buy the house." He set his phone down carefully. "For $2.3 million. Evelyn's eyes widened. That's a lot of money." "Yeah." "What did you tell them?" "That I wasn't interested." He went back to the sink, needing something to do with his hands. "This house isn't for sale." But even as he said it, the number echoed in his head. $2.3 million. He could buy a place twice this size, somewhere without the constant repairs, without the aging infrastructure, without the memories of his grandfather in every corner. He could expand his business, hire help, stop working 60-hour weeks for modest returns. He could offer Evelyn something better than a drafty house by a river, something that didn't require her to live on his charity while she rebuilt her life. "Caleb?" Evelyn's voice pulled him back. "You okay?" "Fine. Just surprised." He forced a smile. "They'll probably call back, but the answer's the same. This house stays in the family." Evelyn nodded, but something in her expression suggested she'd heard the hesitation in his voice that he'd tried to hide. The email arrived an hour later, and despite his stated disinterest, Caleb opened it. The proposal was professional and comprehensive. Photos of comparable developments, projections of neighborhood improvement, testimonials from other sellers about how the buyout had changed their lives. And at the bottom, in bold, final offer, $2,300,000. Expires December 15th, 2025. He closed the laptop and tried to forget about it, but the number had planted itself in his brain like a seed, growing roots in the quiet moments. When the furnace made that concerning rattling sound, he thought, 2.3 million would buy a house with a new furnace. When he had to reschedule a client because his truck wouldn't start, he thought 2.3 million would buy a reliable vehicle, and then some. When he watched Evelyn working at the kitchen table, her nonprofit consulting bringing in maybe a tenth of what she used to make, he thought 2.3 million could give her options, could let her choose her work instead of taking whatever paid the bills. He didn't tell her he'd opened the email, didn't mention the proposal or the deadline. It was his house, his decision, and he'd already made it. Except he hadn't. Not really, because the question kept circling back. What was he holding on to exactly? A house that needed constant repairs? A location that kept him tied to a past he couldn't change? The memory of a grandfather who'd built something with his own hands that Caleb had spent years merely maintaining instead of building something of his own? Thanksgiving came, and they spent it together, just the two of them, because neither had family left to go to. Evelyn cooked a small turkey with all the traditional sides, teaching Caleb her grandmother's recipe for stuffing that involved bread she'd baked herself and herbs she'd grown in pots on the windowsill. "This is perfect," Caleb said, meaning the food, but also meaning the day, the warm kitchen, the easy company, all of it. "It's nice, isn't it?" Evelyn refilled their wine glasses. "Having somewhere to belong for the holidays, someone to belong with." "Yeah." He met her eyes across the table. "It is." Something passed between them in that look. Something that had been building for weeks, an acknowledgement of what they were dancing around. But before either could give it words, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a call. She glanced at the screen and went pale. "It's my old company, the board chair." "You don't have to answer." "I know." But she answered anyway, stepping out onto the porch. Caleb couldn't hear the conversation through the closed door, but he could see Evelyn's body language, the way she stood very still, the way her free hand gripped the porch railing. When she came back inside 15 minutes later, her expression was carefully neutral. "They want me to come to Seattle," she said. "Emergency board meeting on Monday. They're willing to double the equity offer if I'll reconsider the partnership." "Double?" Caleb's voice came out strangled. "They said the projects I started are failing without my oversight. They need me." She sat down heavily. "They're sending a car for me Sunday night." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I know I said I was done with that world, but Caleb, the money they're offering, I could actually have financial security, could stop worrying about making rent somewhere if—" She stopped abruptly. "If what?" Caleb asked, though he knew what she'd almost said. "If this doesn't work out, if living here is temporary, if they weren't building something that would last." "Nothing, just—" "I told them I'd think about it." She stood up. "I'm sorry, I'm not very hungry anymore. Do you mind if I—" "Go ahead," Caleb said quietly. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the guest room door close. He sat alone at their Thanksgiving table, looking at the half-eaten meal, the wine glasses, the evidence of the life they'd been building together. $2.3 million. His number. Partnership equity worth twice what she'd been offered before. Her number. And between them, a house by a river that was starting to feel like not enough. The weekend passed in a fog of careful politeness. Evelyn packed a small bag for Seattle, choosing her words as carefully as she chose her clothes. Professional armor she hadn't worn in weeks. Caleb threw himself into work, taking emergency calls he would have normally declined, staying busy so he didn't have to think about the car that would arrive Sunday night to take her away. Sunday evening came too fast. The town car pulled up at 7, sleek and black and completely out of place in front of Caleb's weathered house. The driver stepped out to take Evelyn's bag, and she stood in the doorway with Caleb, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye. "It's just one meeting," Evelyn said, though they both knew it was more than that. "I'll be back Tuesday." "Okay." "Caleb." She reached for his hand, then seemed to think better of it. "This doesn't change anything. Between us. This house. I'm just going to hear what they have to say." "I know." But he didn't know, not really, because what they had existed in a careful balance that felt suddenly precarious. "Good luck. Or break a leg. Whatever you say for business meetings." She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "Don't burn the house down while I'm gone." "No promises." She leaned forward and kissed his cheek, brief, tentative, loaded with everything they hadn't said, and then she was gone, folding herself into the town car that glided away into the November dark. Caleb stood on his porch and watched the taillights disappear, feeling the house settle into silence behind him. He went inside and saw the evidence of her everywhere. The bread she'd made that morning, the coffee cup she'd forgotten to wash, the book she'd left on the couch with a receipt marking her place. The house that had felt alive with two people suddenly felt like a museum of what might have been temporary all along. He called his neighbor Tom, who answered on the second ring. You busy? Caleb asked. Watching football. Why? Want to get a drink? Tom was quiet for a moment. Caleb never asked to get drinks. Yeah, man. O'Malley's in 20. The bar was nearly empty on a Sunday night, just a handful of regulars watching sports on the mounted TVs. Caleb and Tom took a booth in the back, and Caleb ordered a whiskey that he stared at instead of drinking. Woman trouble? Tom asked, because they'd been friends since high school, and he could read Caleb like a headline. Is it that obvious? You look like someone kicked your dog. What happened? Caleb explained the whole thing. Evelyn showing up with a suitcase, the weeks of living together, the way the house had come alive around her presence. He told Tom about the developer's offer, about Evelyn's old company trying to lure her back, about the feeling that everything was about to fall apart. So let me get this straight, Tom said when Caleb finished. You're in love with this woman, she might be in love with you, but instead of telling her that, you're sitting in a bar feeling sorry for yourself while she's in Seattle deciding whether to take a job that'll pull her away? I'm not, Caleb started, then stopped. I didn't say I was in love with her. You didn't have to. I've known you 15 years, and I've never heard you talk about anyone the way you talk about her. You let her move into your grandfather's house, man. You don't do that for just anyone. It's complicated. It's not, though. Tom leaned forward. You love her. She probably loves you. The only complicated part is both of you being too scared to say it out loud. So here's my advice. Go to Seattle. Tell her how you feel. Let her make her choice with all the information instead of half of it. I can't do that. It's manipulative. She needs to decide what she wants based on what's right for her, not based on my feelings. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Tom finished his beer. Relationships aren't contracts where everyone makes independent decisions in a vacuum. They're partnerships where people get to know what they mean to each other. You're not manipulating her by being honest. You're giving her the full picture. What if she chooses the job anyway? Then at least you'll know. But right now, you're making the choice for her by staying silent. Tom stood up, throwing cash on the table. Go to Seattle, Caleb. Don't let the best thing that's happened to you slip away because you're too scared to fight for it. Caleb sat alone in the booth after Tom left, turning the whiskey glass in his hands. The TV above the bar showed a game he wasn't watching, and the other patrons laughed at jokes he couldn't hear. His phone sat on the table, Evelyn's contact information just a few taps away. He thought about his grandfather, who'd built a house with his own hands because he wanted to make something that would last. Who'd proposed to his grandmother after knowing her for 3 weeks because, as he told Caleb years later, when you know, and waiting doesn't make it more true. Caleb had spent years being careful, being measured, keeping people at a safe distance so rejection couldn't reach him. And where had it gotten him? Alone in a house too big for one person, fixing other people's broken things while his own life stayed in careful stasis. He pulled out his phone and bought a bus ticket to Seattle for first thing in the morning. The Greyhound left Portland at 6 a.m., arriving in Seattle just before 10. Caleb spent the 4-hour ride staring out the window at the gray landscape sliding past, rehearsing what he'd say and discarding every version as insufficient. How did you tell someone they'd become necessary to your life? That the house you'd lived in for years only felt like home once they were in it? The board meeting was scheduled for 11 at the downtown offices of Evelyn's old company. Caleb found the building easily, a glass tower not unlike the Montgomery, all expensive surfaces and the quiet hum of serious money. He must have looked out of place in his jeans and work jacket because the security guard stopped him at the entrance. Can I help you? I'm here to see Evelyn Moore. She's in a meeting on... He realized he didn't know what floor. Miss Moore? The guard checked his computer. Are you expected? No, but it's important. The guard's expression suggested he'd heard that before. I can't let you up without clearance. If you'd like to wait in the lobby, I can try to get a message to her when her meeting concludes. Caleb was about to argue when he saw her through the glass wall separating the lobby from the elevator bank. Evelyn, wearing a suit he'd never seen, her hair pulled back severely, walking with a group of men in expensive clothes who gestured as they talked. She looked every inch the successful consultant, polished and professional and completely at ease in this world of glass and steel. She looked nothing like the woman who'd stood in his kitchen with flour on her nose, learning to make pie crust from scratch. Caleb watched her disappear into an elevator, and for a moment his courage failed him. What was he doing here? Tom's advice had seemed wise in the dim light of a bar, but standing in this lobby, seeing Evelyn in her element, he felt the full weight of his presumption. Who was he to ask her to choose his shabby riverside house over this? To choose fixing leaky pipes and making bread over partnership equity and professional success? He was turning to leave when he heard his name. Caleb? He spun around to find Evelyn standing in the elevator bank, her professional mask cracked by obvious surprise. The men she'd been with paused, looking between them with curiosity. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing the lobby toward him. "I needed to talk to you. It couldn't wait." He glanced at the men waiting by the elevator. "But you're busy." "I shouldn't have come." "Give me 5 minutes," Evelyn said to the men, not taking her eyes off Caleb. "Start without me. I'll be right there." She led him to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the security desk and the morning traffic of executives and coffee runs. Up close, he could see she'd barely slept, shadows under her eyes, tension in her shoulders. "How did you even know I was here?" she asked. "You said downtown offices. There's only one building fancy enough." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Look, I'm sorry for showing up like this, but I couldn't let you make this decision without—" He stopped, trying to find the right words. "Without what?" "Without telling you the truth. About the house. About us. About what I want." He took a breath. "I got an offer from developers, $2.3 million for the property, and I didn't tell you because I was scared." Evelyn went very still. "Scared of what?" "Scared that if you knew I was thinking about selling, you'd realize there was nothing keeping you in Portland, that the house was the only reason you stayed." He met her eyes. "But that's not the truth. The truth is, I don't care about the house. I care about you. And I've been too much of a coward to say it out loud because saying it makes it real, and making it real means risking everything." "Caleb, let me finish." His voice was rough. "When you showed up with that suitcase, I thought you were just someone who needed somewhere to land. But you're not just someone living in my house, Evelyn. You're the reason I want to come home. You're the reason the house feels alive instead of like a museum to my grandfather's memory. You turned my careful loneliness into something I didn't even know I was missing." Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You should have told me about the developers." "I know. And you definitely shouldn't have let me come to this meeting thinking you were fine with whatever I decided." "I know that too. Because you're not fine with it, are you? You want me to turn them down? To choose your house over this?" She gestured at the building around them. "No." Caleb stepped closer. "I want you to choose what makes you happy. But I want you to know that if you choose to stay, it's not just choosing a house by a river. It's choosing me, us, whatever this is that we've been building together. And if I choose this, the partnership, the career I spent years building, then I'll understand, and I'll be grateful for the weeks we had. It would break something in him, but he'd survive. He'd survived worse losses. But you deserve to make that choice knowing the full picture. Knowing that there's someone back in Portland who wants you to stay for reasons that have nothing to do with rent or convenience or friendship." One of the men from the elevator bank called out, "Ms. Moore, we're ready for you." Evelyn held up a hand without looking at him, keeping her eyes locked on Caleb. "I need to go. They're waiting." "I know. But Caleb—" She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Thank you for coming here, for saying all of that." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." She squeezed his hand once more, then let go. "But I'll figure it out." He watched her walk back to the elevator, watched her disappear behind closing doors, and then he was alone in the lobby with the security guard eyeing him suspiciously. Caleb made his way back to the street, into the Seattle drizzle that seemed appropriate for his current state of mind. He'd said what he came to say. The rest was up to her. The bus ride home felt longer than the trip there. Caleb stared out the window at the same gray landscape, replaying the conversation, wondering if he'd said too much or not enough, if showing up had been romantic or just desperate. By the time he got back to Portland, it was after dark, and his house waited for him, empty again, but now loaded with the ghost of what it had been when she was there. He heated up leftovers and ate them standing at the kitchen counter, too restless to sit. He tried to watch TV and gave up after 10 minutes. He pulled out his phone a dozen times to text her, then put it away without typing anything. At midnight, Evelyn still hadn't called. At 1 a.m., Caleb gave up on sleep and went out to the porch, watching the river flow past in the darkness. The November air was cold enough to see his breath, but he didn't go back inside for a jacket. The cold felt appropriate, like penance for all the things he should have said weeks ago. His phone buzzed at 1:30. A text from Evelyn. "Still awake?" He called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said, and her voice sounded tired and raw. "Hey, how did the meeting go?" "Long. They made their pitch. It was impressive." She paused. "They really do need me, Caleb. The projects I started are falling apart. They're willing to give me almost anything I ask for to come back." His heart sank. "That's good. That you're valued." "Is it?" She laughed, but it sounded broken. "Because it doesn't feel good. It feels like being needed for what I can do instead of who I am. And I've spent enough of my life being useful to realize I want more than that." "Evelyn, I'm coming home," she said quietly. "I told them no. Again. More firmly this time. I told them I wasn't interested in partnership or equity or any of it because I finally figured out what I actually want." Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "A life that feels real. Work that matters to me instead of work that impresses other people. A house that needs fixing and someone to fix it with." Her voice caught. "You, Caleb. I want you. I want us. I want whatever this thing is that we've been too scared to name." The relief hit him like a wave, leaving him breathless. "When are you coming back?" "There's a late bus. I'll be home by 4 a.m. "I'll wait up." "You don't have to eat." "I'll wait up," he repeated firmly. "Drive safe." "It's a bus." "Ride safe then." She laughed, a real laugh this time, the sound he'd been missing all day. "See you soon." But Caleb spent the next 2 hours cleaning the house with manic energy, changing sheets that didn't need changing, reorganizing cupboards that were already organized, doing anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from spinning out into worry that she'd change her mind between Seattle and Portland. At 3:45, he gave up pretending and went to stand on the porch, watching the road for headlights. The bus pulled up at 4:03, and Evelyn climbed out with her small bag, looking exhausted and beautiful and absolutely certain. She walked up the driveway slowly, her eyes locked on his, and when she reached the porch, she dropped her bag and just looked at him. "I'm scared," she said. "Me too. I don't know how to do this. How to build a life with someone. I'm probably going to mess it up." "We'll mess it up together," Caleb said. "That's what people do." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the vulnerability in her eyes. "I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was too scared it would ruin everything. But you showing up today, telling me the truth? I don't want to be scared anymore. I love you too." The words came easier than he'd expected, like they'd been waiting to be said all along. "I think I have since that first night when you showed up with a suitcase and nowhere else you wanted to be." Evelyn closed the final distance between them, and when she kissed him, it felt like coming home and starting something new all at once. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him with a sigh that sounded like relief. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "So what now?" "Now we go inside. You get some sleep. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." "What about the developer's offer?" "Not interested," Caleb said firmly. "This house is ours now. We'll fix it up properly, make it into something that's not just my grandfather's legacy, but our home." "Our home," Evelyn repeated, trying out the words. "I like the sound of that." They went inside together and Caleb watched her climb the stairs to the guest room. Her room, he corrected himself, because this was her home now too. He made his way to his own room, falling into bed with the bone-deep satisfaction of someone who'd taken a risk and had it pay off. His phone buzzed one final time. A text from Evelyn. "Thank you for fighting for us, for coming to Seattle, for making me brave enough to choose what I actually want." He typed back, "Thank you for choosing this, for choosing us." For the first time in years, Caleb fell asleep feeling like the future was something to look forward to instead of something to simply endure. The house settled around him, warmer now, more alive, full of the promise of what they'd build together. But the relief was premature. Because 2 floors below in the master bedroom that Caleb never used, a pipe that had been slowly corroding for months finally gave way with a sound like a gunshot, and water began flooding the floor with the steady determination of something that had been waiting for the worst possible moment to break. The sound woke Caleb from the deepest sleep he'd had in months. A sharp crack followed by the unmistakable rush of water where water shouldn't be. He was on his feet before he was fully conscious, muscle memory from years of emergency plumbing calls overriding the fog of exhaustion. The hallway was dark, but he could hear it now. The steady pour of water hitting hardwood, the spreading damage happening with every second he stood there. He flipped the light switch and his heart stopped. Water was seeping from under the master bedroom door, spreading across the hallway floor in an expanding pool that caught the overhead light like black glass. "No, no, no," he muttered, running for the door. He threw it open and was hit by a wall of humid air and the sight of water cascading from the ceiling like an indoor waterfall, pouring from a burst pipe in the wall and flooding the room his grandparents had shared for 40 years. Caleb's feet hit water that was already ankle-deep and rising. He splashed through to the closet, where the shut-off valve should be, his mind cataloging the damage even as he moved, the hardwood floors buckling, the antique dresser already warping, water soaking into his grandmother's handmade quilt that still covered the bed. His hands found the valve, and he cranked it hard to the right. The rushing water slowed, then stopped, leaving only the drip, drip, drip of residual drainage and Caleb standing in the ruins of a room he'd preserved like a shrine. "Caleb?" Evelyn's voice came from the doorway, thick with sleep. "What happened? I heard... Oh my God!" She stood in the threshold taking in the scene, Caleb knee-deep in water, the ceiling sagging where the pipe had burst, puddles spreading across surfaces that had survived half a century only to be destroyed in minutes. Her hand went to her mouth. "The pipe," Caleb said numbly. "The main supply line to the upstairs bathroom. I knew it was old, should have replaced it years ago, but I kept putting it off because it meant tearing into the walls. How bad is it?" He looked around the room, really seeing it now. The water had reached the baseboards, was probably already seeping into the walls, spreading rot and mold into the structure itself. The ceiling would need to be opened up, the pipe replaced, everything dried out and repaired. The furniture, his grandfather's dresser, his grandmother's vanity, the bed frame they'd shared, all of it was soaked. "Bad," he said quietly. "Really bad." Evelyn stepped into the water without hesitation, wading over to him. "What do we do?" "Get the water out before it spreads further. Shop vac, towels, anything that'll soak it up. Then fans to dry everything out. Then..." He ran a hand through his hair. "Then we assess the real damage." They worked through the night like soldiers in a losing battle. Caleb hauled up his industrial shop vac from the garage and they took turns running it, emptying bucket after bucket of water down the toilet. Evelyn stripped the bed, gathering the soaked quilt and linens and hanging them outside even though it was still raining. She pulled drawers from the dresser, salvaging what she could, laying out photo albums on the kitchen table to air dry. By the time the sun came up, they'd managed to get most of the standing water out, but the damage was evident everywhere. The hardwood floors had swelled and buckled in places, pulling away from the walls. The ceiling had a 2-foot section that sagged dangerously, water-stained and threatening to collapse. The walls would need to be opened up to check for mold, which meant more destruction, more repair, more money Caleb didn't have. They sat on the porch as dawn broke, both soaked and exhausted, sharing a thermos of coffee that Evelyn had somehow managed to make in the chaos. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally. "For what? You didn't burst the pipe. For bringing you into this mess. You just got home, just decided to stay, and now the house is..." He gestured helplessly. "It's falling apart. Literally." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, staring at her coffee. "Can I tell you something? Back in that lobby in Seattle, when you showed up looking like you'd rather be anywhere else but knew you had to be there, I realized something." "What?" "That you're the first person in my life who ever fought for me. Not for what I could do for them, not for my resume, or my connections, or my consulting expertise. You showed up because you wanted me. Just me. She turned to look at him. A burst pipe doesn't change that. It changes the house, though. Changes what I can offer you. He set down his coffee. That developer's offer is still on the table until December 15th. 2.3 million would let us start over somewhere better, somewhere that doesn't need constant repairs. Is that what you want? Evelyn interrupted. To sell? The question hung between them like the burst pipe had. Inevitable, necessary, impossible to ignore. Caleb looked at the house behind them, at the place his grandfather had built with his own hands, where his grandparents had lived their entire married life, where he'd spent summers learning to fish and winters learning to fix things. But he also saw what it had become, a museum to the past, a burden he'd carried alone for too long, a structure that was literally crumbling around him. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me thinks we should cut our losses, take the money, find somewhere we can build our own life instead of trying to preserve someone else's. But another part feels like selling would be giving up on everything my grandfather worked for. What did your grandfather want? Evelyn asked. When he built this place, what was he hoping for? Caleb thought about the stories his grandfather used to tell, about choosing this lot because the river reminded him of the creek where he'd grown up, about learning carpentry from library books and trial and error, about the day he'd brought Caleb's grandmother here when it was just a foundation and asked her to marry him. He wanted a place where his family could grow, Caleb said slowly, where they could make a life that felt real and solid and earned. And did he? Make that life? Yeah. He and my grandmother were happy here, really happy. They raised my dad here, and when my parents died, they raised me here too. This house was full of life for decades. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. So the question isn't whether the house is worth saving, it's whether it can be that again. Whether we can fill it with life instead of just preserving what was. Before Caleb could respond, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number but answered anyway, too tired to screen calls. Mr. Turner? This is Patricia Hendricks from Cascade Development. I wanted to follow up on our offer. Not a great time, Caleb said shortly. I understand, but I wanted to make sure you received our proposal. The December 15th deadline is firm, and we're prepared to move quickly if you're interested. In fact, if you can commit today, we're authorized to add another $100,000 to the offer. Caleb closed his eyes. 2.4 million now. The number that had seemed impossible yesterday now felt like a lifeline. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, but Mr. Turner, I should mention that we've heard through the grapevine about your recent flooding incident. Her voice took on a sympathetic tone that felt calculated. Property damage like that can be expensive to repair, especially in a house of this age. If the structure has been compromised, you're looking at tens of thousands in repairs, possibly more. Our offer stands regardless of condition, which means you wouldn't have to worry about fixing anything. We'd take the property as is. How did you know about the flood? Caleb asked, suspicion sharpening his exhaustion. Portland's a small town, Mr. Turner. Word travels. I'm just trying to help you understand your options. She paused. Think about it. 2.4 million, no repairs needed, close by year end. That's enough to buy something twice as nice without the headaches of an aging property. She hung up before he could respond. Caleb set down his phone and found Evelyn watching him with knowing eyes. They know, he said. The developers. They somehow know about the burst pipe, and they're using it to pressure me to sell. How is that even possible? Small town, like she said, or they've been watching the property, waiting for something like this. He laughed bitterly. Probably had someone monitoring building permits, plumbing emergencies, anything that would make selling more attractive. That's invasive. That's business. He stood up, pacing the length of the porch. But she's not wrong about the repair costs. Opening up walls, replacing old pipes, fixing water damage. I'm looking at 40,000 easy. Maybe more depending on what we find. And that's just this incident. The whole house is old, Evelyn. If one pipe burst, others could follow. The electrical is probably due for an update. The roof needs replacing in the next few years. It's a money pit. So we fix it, Evelyn said simply. With what money? I've got some savings, but not enough for everything this place needs. And you just left your job. I have savings too. Quite a bit, actually. I was making stupid money for 5 years and barely spending it because I was never home. She stood up, crossing to him. I can cover the repairs. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. I'm not taking your money to fix my house. Our house, Evelyn corrected. You said it yourself last night. This is our home now, Caleb. That means we face these problems together. It's not your responsibility. Stop it. Her voice was firm. Stop trying to carry everything alone. Stop acting like accepting help makes you weak, or like you're somehow failing your grandfather by not doing everything yourself. She grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. You showed up in Seattle because you didn't want me making decisions in a vacuum, so don't do the same thing now. We're in this together, which means my money is your money, and your problems are my problems. And we figure this out as a team. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could handle it himself, but the truth was he was exhausted. Exhausted from years of maintaining a house alone. Exhausted from pretending he didn't need help. Exhausted from carrying the weight of his grandfather's legacy like it was a burden instead of a gift. Okay, he said quietly. Together. They spent the day assessing the real damage. Caleb cut into the ceiling to expose the burst pipe and found what he'd feared. The corrosion extended beyond the breakpoint, meaning more of the line needed replacement than he'd hoped. The walls showed early signs of mold from moisture that had been seeping unnoticed for months, which meant remediation before they could even start repairs. By afternoon, he'd made a list of what needed to be done. Remove damaged drywall, treat for mold, replace the entire main supply line, repair the ceiling, refinish the floors, repaint. The number at the bottom of the list made his stomach turn. $43,000, and that was if he did most of the labor himself. Evelyn looked at the number without flinching. That's less than I thought it would be. That's more than I have. But it's less than we have together. She took the list from him. And it's a lot less than $2.4 million, which means we'd still have money left over for other repairs, for building the life we want here. You're serious about this? About putting your money into a house that might need another $40,000 in repairs next year? I'm serious about building a life with you, Evelyn said. The house is just where we do it. If it needs repairs, we repair it. That's what people who own homes do. Most people don't have to repair everything at once. Then we'll do it in stages. Fix the urgent stuff now, tackle the rest as we can afford it. She sat down at the kitchen table, pulling out her phone. I have about $60,000 in savings. That covers this repair with money left over for emergencies. You focus on the work, I'll focus on the budget. We'll make it work. Caleb sat down across from her, overwhelmed by her certainty. Why are you so sure about this? Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing something that matters to me instead of something that looks good on paper. Because I love you, and I love what we're building here, and I'm not going to let a burst pipe scare me away. She reached across the table for his hand. Unless you want to sell. If you really think that's the better choice, I'll support it. But make the choice based on what you actually want, not based on fear of the work ahead. He turned her hand over in his, looking at the calluses she'd developed from their repair projects. The nails that were no longer manicured, the small scar on her thumb from when she'd cut herself learning to use a saw. These weren't the hands of a corporate consultant anymore. They were the hands of someone who'd chosen a different kind of life. I want to keep the house, he said. I want to fix it up properly, turn it into something we built together. I want our kids... He stopped, surprised by the words that had come out unbidden. Evelyn's eyes widened. Kids? I mean, eventually. Maybe. If you... He was backtracking now, suddenly terrified he'd gone too far. I want that too, Evelyn said quietly. Kids running around this yard, learning to fish off that dock, growing up in a house full of love instead of just expensive furniture. Her voice caught. I want all of it, Caleb. The whole messy, complicated, beautiful thing. He kissed her then, there in the kitchen that still smelled like flood water and coffee, and it felt like a promise, not of perfection, but of partnership, of choosing the hard work of building something real over the easy escape of starting over somewhere else. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was smiling. So we're doing this? Keeping the house? Fixing it up? Building our life here? We're doing this, Caleb confirmed. Then I'm calling Patricia Hendricks back and telling her to take her offer and let me do it. Caleb pulled out his phone, finding the number in his recent calls. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice professionally pleasant. Mr. Turner, have you had a chance to think about our revised offer? I have, Caleb said. And the answer is no. The house isn't for sale. Not now, not in December, not ever. Please remove my property from your acquisition list. There was a pause. Mr. Turner, I don't think you fully understand the financial implications of turning down $2.4 million to repair a house that's falling apart. I understand perfectly, Caleb interrupted. I'm choosing the house that's falling apart because it's mine, and because I'm building a life here that matters more than money. So, thank you for your interest, but we're done here. He hung up before she could respond, feeling lighter than he had in days. Evelyn was grinning. That was extremely satisfying to listen to. Felt pretty good to say. He looked around the kitchen at the water-stained ceiling and the mess they still needed to clean up. So where do we start? We start by calling in professionals for the mold remediation, Evelyn said, back in strategy mode. That's not something we can DIY. While they're working, we can start on the other rooms, finish the porch, update the electrical in the living room, tackle the projects we've been putting off. You've really thought this through. I spent 5 years managing complex projects. This is just a different kind of restructuring. She pulled out a notebook and started making lists. We'll need contractors for the mold and the major pipe work. Everything else we can handle ourselves. I'll get quotes today. You work on clearing out the master bedroom so they can access everything when they start. They fell into the rhythm that had sustained them through the past weeks. Evelyn planning and organizing, Caleb executing and building, both of them working toward a common goal that felt bigger than just fixing a house. The mold remediation team arrived 2 days later, grim-faced men in hazmat suits who confirmed Caleb's worst fears. The moisture damage extended beyond the master bedroom into the adjoining walls, which meant more work, more time, more money. But they could fix it, they assured him. It would just take 3 weeks and an additional $10,000. Evelyn didn't blink at the revised estimate. She wrote the check and told them to start immediately. While the remediation team worked upstairs, Caleb and Evelyn tackled the rest of the house. They finished the porch, replacing all the old boards with new ones that Evelyn learned to treat and seal properly. They updated the electrical in the living room, Caleb teaching her about circuits and breakers while she asked questions that made him think about his work in new ways. They painted every room except the master bedroom, choosing colors together, arguing good-naturedly about shades of blue until they compromised on something Evelyn called sea foam and Caleb called light blue-green. The house transformed around them. What had been a museum to Caleb's grandparents slowly became something else, a home that reflected both of them, that showed the work of their hands and the choices they'd made together. Evelyn's plants thrived in south-facing windows. Caleb's tools had a proper workshop in the garage. The kitchen held both their cooking styles, her fancy knives next to his well-worn cutting boards. 3 weeks later, the remediation team finished their work. The master bedroom was stripped to the studs, the mold gone, the new pipes gleaming in the exposed walls. It looked like a construction zone, but it was clean, dry, and ready to be rebuilt. Caleb and Evelyn stood in the doorway, looking at the empty space. "It's kind of sad," Evelyn said, "seeing it like this. All those years, all those memories, just gone." "Not gone," Caleb corrected, "just transformed. We're building something new on the same foundation." He put his arm around her shoulders. "My grandfather would have understood that. He built this house because he wanted to create something that would last, something that could hold a family. The structure doesn't matter as much as what we do with it." So what do we do with it? Caleb had been thinking about this for weeks, turning over possibilities in his mind during the long hours of repair work. "I think we make it ours, not try to recreate what it was, but build what it could be. New floors, new paint, furniture we choose together. Keep the bones, but change everything else." "I like that," Evelyn said. "A bedroom that's ours, not theirs. A fresh start in an old house." They spent the next month rebuilding the master bedroom from scratch. Caleb handled the structural work, new drywall, proper insulation, updated electrical outlets. Evelyn researched design elements, choosing light fixtures and paint colors, and window treatments that would make the space feel warm and welcoming. They worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms, figuring out how to communicate when they disagreed, celebrating small victories like getting the drywall to line up perfectly or finding the right shade of cream for the walls. By the time December arrived, the room was finished. New hardwood floors that matched the rest of the house, walls painted a soft gray that caught the morning light, windows dressed with curtains Evelyn had chosen and Caleb had hung. The furniture was new, a bed they'd picked out together, a dresser from an estate sale that Evelyn had refinished, a reading chair by the window where Caleb could sit and watch the river. The only thing they'd kept from before was a single photograph, his grandparents on their wedding day, young and hopeful and ready to build a life together. Evelyn had found a new frame for it and hung it by the door, a bridge between what the room had been and what it was becoming. They moved Caleb's things from the guest room on a Saturday in mid-December, carrying boxes and bags up the stairs together. That night, they stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, their bedroom now, and surveyed their work. "It's perfect," Evelyn said. "It's ours," Caleb corrected and pulled her inside. They christened the room properly that night, making it theirs in the most fundamental way, and when Caleb woke up the next morning with Evelyn curled against him in the bed they'd chosen together, in the room they'd rebuilt together, in the house they'd decided to keep together, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: complete. The December 15th deadline came and went without ceremony. Caleb received one final call from Patricia Hendricks, which he let go to voicemail. She left a message expressing disappointment in his decision and warning him that future offers wouldn't be as generous. He deleted it without listening to the whole thing. That evening, he and Evelyn sat on their finished porch, properly sealed, structurally sound, ready to last another 50 years, and watched the winter sun set over the river. The house behind them was warm with lights and life. No longer a museum, but a home actively being lived in. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked. "Turning down all that money?" Caleb thought about it honestly. The money would have been nice. It would have made things easier, would have removed the financial pressure they'd be under for the next few years while they paid off the repairs. But easy wasn't the same as right. "No," he said. "I don't regret it. This house, what we're building here, it's worth more than money. Even when the water heater inevitably breaks and we have to spend another few thousand fixing it, even then," he pulled her closer, "because we'll fix it together and the house will be better for it, and we'll have another story to tell about the time everything went wrong and we made it right anyway." Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you. You know that?" "I know. I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the river, two people who'd found each other in the midst of separate crises and built something solid from the wreckage. The house held them gently, its old bones supporting their new dreams, and somewhere in the walls, Caleb could almost hear his grandfather's approving laughter. Inside, their home waited, imperfect, in need of ongoing care, absolutely right. The winter that followed was the kind that tested everything: the house's new repairs, their commitment to each other, their ability to navigate the daily friction of two people learning to build a life from scratch. January brought freezing rain that turned the driveway into an ice rink and revealed a leak in the roof they hadn't known existed. February came with a cold snap that pushed the ancient furnace to its limits, and finally beyond them, dying on the coldest night of the year. Caleb woke at 3 a.m. to a house that felt like a refrigerator, and Evelyn wrapped around him like a desperate vine, both of them shivering under every blanket they owned. "The furnace is dead, isn't it?" she mumbled against his chest. "Probably." He could see his breath in the darkness. "I'll check it in the morning." "We're going to freeze to death before morning." "Then we'll freeze together." He pulled her closer. "Very romantic. They'll write songs about us." She laughed despite the cold, and the sound warmed him more than the blankets ever could. "I'm holding you to that. If we survive this, you owe me a song." They survived, though just barely, huddling in the kitchen with the oven door open while Caleb diagnosed the furnace in the gray light of dawn. The news wasn't good. The heat exchanger had cracked, which meant the whole unit needed replacing. Another $8,000 they hadn't budgeted for, coming on the heels of the roof repair and the plumbing work. Evelyn took the news with the same practical acceptance she'd shown for every financial hit so far. She pulled up her savings account, did some quick math, and nodded. "We can cover it. We'll just have to push back the kitchen renovation." "We don't have to renovate the kitchen," Caleb said. "It works fine." "It works. Fine is debatable." She poured them both coffee from the pot they'd made on the camp stove. "But you're right. The furnace is more important than new cabinets. We'll make do." Making do became their motto that winter. When the garage door opener broke, Caleb fixed it with parts from the hardware store instead of replacing the whole unit. When Evelyn's car started making concerning noises, she learned basic auto maintenance from YouTube videos rather than taking it to a mechanic. They ate in more, found free entertainment in the library and long walks by the river, discovered that happiness had less to do with having everything perfect and more to do with facing imperfection together. By March, when the first crocuses pushed through the half-frozen ground, they'd weathered enough small disasters to feel confident they could weather anything. The house stood solid around them, warm again with the new furnace, dry under the repaired roof, slowly becoming less of a project and more of a home. Evelyn had built up a steady roster of nonprofit clients, working from the kitchen table with a focus that reminded Caleb of the consultant she'd been. Except now she smiled more, stressed less, and actually stopped working when dinner was ready. Caleb's business was thriving in ways it never had when he was alone. Something about having someone to come home to made him more efficient, more focused, more willing to take on the challenging jobs he used to avoid. They were making it work, building something real and lasting from the foundation his grandfather had laid, and the choices they'd made together. But they still hadn't named what they were to each other beyond the private acknowledgments they'd exchanged that night when Evelyn came back from Seattle. They lived together, slept together, made decisions together, but when clients asked about his personal life or when Evelyn's old colleagues called asking how she was doing, they both stumbled over the terminology. Partner felt too businesslike. Girlfriend and boyfriend felt too young. They existed in a liminal space that worked in private but felt incomplete in public. On a Saturday in late March, Caleb came home from a job to find Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table staring at her laptop with an expression he couldn't read. "What's wrong?" he asked, already cataloging possible disasters. Client problems, family issues. Though she had no family left, bad news from her doctor. "Nothing's wrong," she said slowly. "Something's right, actually, but I don't know how you'll feel about it." He sat down across from her, suddenly nervous. "Just tell me." She turned the laptop to face him. On the screen was an email with an attachment, a job offer from a foundation in Portland, Director of Strategic Initiatives, which apparently meant helping nonprofits maximize their impact through better organizational structure. The salary was less than half what she'd made in consulting, but it was stable, came with benefits, and would let her do the work she'd discovered she actually cared about. "It's a real job," Evelyn said. "Not freelancing, not making it up as I go. A career, Caleb. Something I could build on, grow with." "That's amazing," he said, confused about why she looked so uncertain. "Why wouldn't I be happy about this?" "Because it would change things. Right now we're both self-employed, working from home, completely flexible. But this would mean office hours, commutes, less time for house projects." She closed the laptop. "Less time for us." Caleb reached across the table for her hand. "Evelyn, I don't want you to turn down opportunities because you're worried about having less time to fix the house with me. This is exactly the kind of work you should be doing, meaningful, challenging, using all that strategy expertise for something that actually matters." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He squeezed her hand. "Take the job. We'll figure out the rest." She took the job, starting the first week of April with a nervousness that reminded Caleb of her first days living in his house, like she was waiting for someone to realize she didn't belong there and ask her to leave. But she came home each evening with stories about grant proposals and capacity building and leadership development, her eyes bright with the kind of engagement that came from work that fed the soul instead of just the bank account. The rhythm of their days shifted. Evelyn left for the office at 8, came home around 6, and they spent evenings cooking together, working on smaller house projects, or simply sitting on the porch watching the river flow past. Weekends were for larger repairs and lazy mornings in bed. for farmers' market runs and experimental cooking projects, for the quiet building of a shared life. By May, when the garden Evelyn had planted started producing actual vegetables, they'd settled into something that felt sustainable. Not perfect. They still argued about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, still had moments of miscommunication and frustration, but real, solid, theirs. One evening in late May, after a dinner made from vegetables they'd grown and fish Caleb had caught from the dock, Evelyn set down her wine glass and looked at him with an expression that made his stomach flip. "We should talk about what we are," she said. "We're us," Caleb said, deflecting instinctively. "You know what I mean. We live together, we've rebuilt a house together, we're building a life together, but we've never actually defined what that means. Are we dating? Are we partners? Are we—" She stopped, seeming to lose her nerve. "Are we what? Are we heading somewhere specific, or are we just enjoying the present without thinking about the future?" She twisted her wine glass. "Because I need to know, Caleb. Not because I'm trying to pressure you or because I need some specific timeline, but because I'm 32 years old and I gave up a career to move into your house, and I need to know if we're building towards something permanent or if this is just temporary comfort until one of us decides they want something else." The question was fair, and Caleb knew it. They'd been living in a kind of extended present tense, not looking too far ahead, not making assumptions about where they were going. It had felt safe, pressure-free, but Evelyn was right. At some point, safety started to look like avoidance. "I want to marry you," Caleb said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "Not right now. Not in some rushed way that's about defining things for the sake of definition, but eventually. I want to marry you and have kids with you and grow old in this house with you. I want all of it, Evelyn. The permanent, scary, committed version." She stared at him, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." "Really? Because I feel like I kind of fumbled it." "You did fumble it." She was smiling now, crying and smiling at the same time. "But that's what made it perfect. You weren't trying to be smooth or impressive. You were just telling me the truth." "So that's okay? That I want all of that?" "It's more than okay." She stood up, crossing to his side of the table. "Because I want all of that too. Marriage, kids, growing old together. All of it. I just needed to know we were on the same page." Caleb pulled her down onto his lap, holding her close. "We're on the same page, same book, same library." She laughed against his neck. "That metaphor got away from you. I'm a plumber, not a poet." "You're my plumber," she corrected, and kissed him with the kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly where they were heading together. 2 months later, on a July evening when the river was running high with mountain snowmelt and the garden was exploding with summer growth, Caleb found himself standing on the dock he'd repaired with Evelyn's help, holding a ring he'd bought with 3 months of carefully saved money. It wasn't a dramatic proposal, no flash mobs or skywriting or elaborate schemes. Just the two of them and the river and the house that had brought them together, the sun setting in shades of orange and pink that made the water look like liquid fire. Evelyn was talking about something work-related, her hands moving expressively as she described a particularly challenging grant proposal when Caleb dropped to one knee on the dock they'd fixed together. She stopped mid-sentence, her hands freezing in mid-gesture. "What are you doing?" she asked, though the dawning realization on her face suggested she knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm probably doing this wrong," Caleb said. "I didn't plan a speech or rehearse or anything, but I was standing here listening to you talk about grant proposals, and I just thought, this is it. This is the life I want. You, talking about work you care about, in the house we fixed together, on the dock we built with our own hands. All of it. Forever." He opened the ring box, revealing a simple band with a single stone that caught the sunset like it was holding a piece of the sky. "Evelyn Moore, will you marry me?" She dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, obviously yes. Did you really think I might say no?" "I thought there was a small chance you'd tell me I was being impulsive and we should wait." "We've been waiting our whole lives to find each other," Evelyn said. "I'm done waiting." He slipped the ring on her finger, and they stayed there on the dock, kneeling face to face as the sun set around them and the river flowed past, carrying away the loneliness they'd both carried for too long and leaving something better in its wake. They married in September, on the lawn between the house and the river, with a small gathering of people who actually mattered. Caleb's high school friend Tom as best man, a few of Evelyn's colleagues from the foundation, some of Caleb's regular clients who'd become friends over the years. No elaborate ceremony, no expensive reception, just a simple exchange of vows they'd written themselves, and a party afterward on the porch with food Evelyn had cooked and beer Caleb had homebrewed in an experiment that had gone surprisingly well. Standing under the arbor Tom had helped him build, watching Evelyn walk toward him in a simple white dress with flowers from their garden in her hair, Caleb felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy finally lift from his shoulders. This house wasn't a shrine anymore. It was a beginning, the place where he and Evelyn would build their own story, raise their own family, create their own version of the life his grandparents had shared. When the officiant asked if he took Evelyn to be his wife, Caleb's voice was steady with certainty. "I do." And when Evelyn said the same words back to him, her eyes bright with joy and tears and absolute sureness, he felt something shift, the final piece of their shared life clicking into place. The first year of marriage was everything and nothing like Caleb had expected. They fought about stupid things, whose turn it was to take out the trash, whether the thermostat should be set at 68 or 70, how to load the dishwasher properly. They made up in ways that reminded them why they'd chosen each other in the first place. They learned each other's rhythms more deeply, discovered new layers of compatibility and occasional friction, figured out how to be married instead of just living together. The house continued to need work, a leaking skylight in October, a broken water main in January, a family of raccoons that took up residence in the attic in March. Each repair brought its own challenges and costs, but somehow they always found a way to make it work. Caleb's business continued to grow, and Evelyn got promoted at the foundation, and together they built the kind of financial stability that made the unexpected repairs manageable instead of catastrophic. In April, a year and a half after Evelyn had first shown up on his doorstep with a suitcase, she came home from work with a different kind of news. She found Caleb in the garage working on a custom shelving unit for the kitchen, covered in sawdust and completely focused on getting a corner joint to fit perfectly. "I'm pregnant," she said without preamble. Caleb's hand slipped, and the drill bit scored a line across the wood he'd been so carefully preparing. He set down the drill slowly, not quite trusting what he'd heard. "Say that again?" "I'm pregnant. 8 weeks, due in November." She was watching him carefully, trying to read his reaction. "I know we said we'd wait until we'd finished more of the house repairs, until we had more money saved, but..." He crossed the garage in 3 strides and picked her up, spinning her around despite her surprised yelp of protest. When he set her down, he was grinning so wide his face hurt. "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby," she confirmed, and burst into tears. The happy kind, the overwhelmed kind. The kind that came from joy so big it needed multiple ways to express itself. They spent that evening sitting on the porch, Caleb's hand on Evelyn's still flat stomach, talking about nursery colors and baby names and all the ways their life was about to change. The house that had felt almost finished suddenly had new purpose. They'd need to convert the second guest room into a nursery, baby-proof the outlets, make sure the stairs had proper railings for when their child was old enough to climb them. "Are you scared?" Evelyn asked as the sun set over the river. "Terrified," Caleb admitted. "I don't know how to be a father. My dad died when I was so young, and my grandfather did his best, but you'll figure it out," Evelyn finished. "The same way we figured out everything else, together, one day at a time, making it up as we go." "That's a terrible parenting strategy. It's the only strategy we've got." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But look at us, Caleb. A year and a half ago, I was a burned-out consultant living in an empty apartment, and you were a lonely plumber maintaining a house you couldn't let go of. Now we're married, we're happy, and we're about to become parents. If we can figure out all of that, we can figure out how to raise a kid." She wasn't wrong. They'd already proven they could navigate the hard parts. The financial stress, the house disasters, the daily compromises of shared life. A baby would be harder, sure, but they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, together. The pregnancy progressed through the summer with typical challenges. Morning sickness that lasted all day, Evelyn's growing discomfort in the Portland heat, The scramble to get the nursery ready before the due date. They painted the room a soft yellow that worked for any gender, since they'd decided to be surprised. Caleb built a crib from plans he'd found online, sanding each piece until it was smooth enough that no splinter could threaten their coming child's perfect skin. Evelyn washed tiny clothes and read parenting books and tried not to panic about all the ways they might mess this up. In October, a month before the due date, Caleb's business got an offer he hadn't expected. A larger plumbing company wanted to partner with him. They'd handle the administrative work and the emergency calls. He'd maintain control of his client relationships and work reasonable hours. It would mean more stable income, health insurance that covered all three of them, and the ability to actually take time off when the baby arrived. He and Evelyn talked about it for hours, weighing independence against stability, pride against practicality. In the end, the decision came down to what they'd learned over the past 2 years. That asking for help wasn't weakness. That partnership made hard things manageable, that you didn't have to do everything alone to prove you were capable. Caleb accepted the offer. Their daughter arrived on a Tuesday in mid-November, 3 weeks early and absolutely perfect. They named her Clara Rose Turner. Clara after Caleb's grandmother, Rose after Evelyn's. She had Caleb's dark hair and Evelyn's intense gaze, and when the nurse placed her in Caleb's arms for the first time, he understood why his grandfather had built a house with his own hands, why he'd worked himself to exhaustion to create something stable and lasting. You did it for this, for the weight of your child in your arms, for the knowledge that you'd built something good enough to shelter them, for the chance to give them the kind of childhood that felt safe and loved and real. Bringing Clara home was both terrifying and magical. The house they'd worked so hard to repair welcomed her with the kind of grace that suggested it had been waiting for her all along. They set up the bassinet in their room, and Caleb spent the first week waking up every hour to check that she was still breathing, that this miracle was real and not some dream he'd wake from to find himself alone again. Evelyn took maternity leave from the foundation, and they spent those first months in the beautiful chaos of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, the learning curve of breastfeeding and the wonder of Clara's first smile, the way she'd quiet immediately when Caleb held her against his chest and let her listen to his heartbeat. The house filled with new sounds, Clara's cries, her gurgles, the music from the mobile over her crib, the lullabies Evelyn sang at 2 a.m. when nothing else would soothe her. The porch became a place for evening walks with the stroller, the river providing the white noise that sent Clara into peaceful sleep. The dock became where Caleb sat with her on quiet mornings, telling her about the grandfather she'd never meet, about the house that had brought her parents together, about the life she'd have here. By the time Clara was 6 months old, they'd settled into something that felt like a sustainable rhythm. Evelyn back at work part-time, Caleb handling the morning shift with Clara before heading out for jobs, both of them tag-teaming the evening routine with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to work together. The house continued to need attention. The water heater finally gave up in February, requiring another unexpected expense, and the front steps started to sag in March, needing reinforcement. But these challenges felt different now. They weren't threats to their stability or proof that they'd made a mistake keeping the house. They were just the ongoing work of maintaining something worth keeping, the price of having a home instead of just a structure. On a Saturday in late spring, when Clara was 8 months old and starting to show signs of wanting to crawl, Caleb found himself on the porch with Evelyn watching their daughter play on a blanket in the grass. The river flowed past as it always had, indifferent to human drama, constant in its changing. The house stood solid behind them, warm with the life they'd built inside it. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd sold?" Evelyn asked, reaching for his hand. "If you'd taken that developer's money and we'd started over somewhere else?" Caleb considered it honestly. Sometimes, usually when something expensive breaks and I'm writing another check I hadn't budgeted for. He squeezed her hand. "But then I think about Clara growing up here, learning to fish off the dock we built, playing in the yard where I played as a kid. I think about the fact that we made this place ours through the work we put into it, not just by buying it. And I can't imagine trading that for anything. Even $2.4 million? Even that." He pulled her close. "Money can buy a lot of things. but it can't buy the feeling of waking up in a house you've repaired with your own hands, next to a woman you fought for, with a daughter who exists because you both chose the hard thing over the easy thing. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, watching Clara discover the fascinating properties of grass. I love our life. Me too. I mean it. I love that we argue about the thermostat and that the house is always slightly broken and that we're perpetually exhausted from keeping up with a baby. I love that we're not impressive from the outside, that we drive old cars and fix our own repairs and eat dinner at home because eating out is too expensive with a kid. I love the realness of it, as opposed to the life I thought I wanted, the corner office, the luxury apartment, the appearance of having it all figured out. She turned to look at him. That life looked perfect from the outside, but it was hollow inside. This life, our life, it's messy and imperfect and sometimes barely held together, but it's real. It's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Clara chose that moment to flip herself over onto her stomach, her first real mobility milestone. She lifted her head and looked at them with an expression of pure triumph, and they both laughed at the perfect timing of it, their daughter choosing this exact moment to show them she was ready to move forward, to explore, to grow. Just like them. The years that followed brought the expected challenges and unexpected joys. Clara's first steps happened on the porch, Caleb catching her when she stumbled. Her first words were Dada and Mama. And then, surprisingly, River, which she said while pointing at the water with the serious concentration of someone naming an important thing. The house continued its gentle decline and constant renewal. Systems that broke and were repaired, surfaces that wore and were refinished, the endless cycle of maintenance that came with owning something old and precious. But Caleb and Evelyn had learned to see these challenges as features rather than bugs, proof that they were living in their home hard enough to wear it down and loved it enough to keep building it back up. Evelyn's career at the foundation flourished, and she eventually became executive director, leading with the same fierce commitment she'd once applied to corporate consulting, but now directed toward actually helping people. Caleb's partnership with the larger plumbing company worked better than he'd hoped, giving him the stability to be present for Clara's childhood while still doing work he found meaningful. They added to the house gradually, a swing set in the backyard when Clara was 3, a treehouse when she was 5, a dog when she was 7 and begged for months straight. Each addition felt like another layer of their story being written into the structure, another way this place became theirs instead of just Caleb's grandfather's legacy. On Clara's 10th birthday, they threw a party in the backyard, filling the space between the house and the river with children and laughter and the kind of joyful chaos that comes from a life being fully lived. Caleb stood on the porch watching his daughter play with her friends, Evelyn's hand in his, and felt the profound satisfaction of having built something that mattered. You know what I realized? Evelyn said, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. What's that? That night I showed up with a suitcase? I thought I was running away from something, but I was actually running toward this, toward you, toward Clara, toward the life we built together. I just didn't know it yet. Best emergency call I ever got, Caleb said. Was it an emergency, though? The pipe was broken, sure, but you were the emergency, he interrupted. This brilliant, exhausted woman standing in a flooded bathroom at 3 a.m., realizing her perfect life wasn't perfect at all. That was the real emergency. Evelyn leaned into him. And you fixed it. We fixed it, he corrected. Together. Clara ran up to them, breathless and happy, her friends trailing behind her. Dad, can we go out on the dock, please? Caleb looked at the dock they'd repaired together all those years ago, solid and stable and ready to hold the weight of whatever came next. Yeah, Bug. Just be careful. He watched his daughter lead her friends down to the river, this child who'd been born from the choice to stay, to fight for something imperfect but real, to build a life based on what mattered instead of what looked good on paper. That evening, after the party was cleaned up and Clara was in bed, Caleb and Evelyn sat on their porch, the same place they'd sat on that first night when everything changed, when a plumber and a consultant had discovered they were both looking for something neither could name, but both recognized when they found it. The river flowed past, unchanged and constantly changing, the way it had flowed when Caleb's grandfather first chose this land, the way it would flow long after Caleb and Evelyn were gone. But for now, In this moment, it flowed past their home, the house they'd chosen to keep, the life they'd chosen to build, the family they'd created from two kinds of loneliness and the courage to try again.
Do you remember what you said to me that first night? Evelyn asked. When you were fixing my pipe and I told you about my empty apartment? Caleb thought back. I made some joke about you being welcome to sit on my porch if your apartment ever felt too big. You said the door was always open. She turned to look at him. And you meant it. Even though I was a stranger, even though it was crazy, you meant it. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Evelyn corrected. First best was going to Seattle to tell me the truth. To fight for us instead of letting me make that choice alone. What about you? What was your best decision? She didn't hesitate. Getting in my car that morning and driving here with the suitcase. Trusting that sometimes the right choice is the one that doesn't make sense on paper. The one that looks like running away but is actually running towards something.
They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the river. Two people who'd learned that home wasn't a place you found but a thing you built with choice and work and daily commitment to showing up for each other even when it was hard. Inside, the house held their sleeping daughter and their shared dreams, the evidence of a decade spent choosing each other over and over again. The porch light stayed on. It always stayed on now, had since that first night when Evelyn showed up uncertain and afraid and hoping for somewhere to belong. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Clara was starting middle school in the fall. The roof would need replacing in the next year or two. Life would continue its relentless forward motion. But they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, together, imperfectly, with the kind of love that wasn't impressive from the outside but felt right every morning they woke up under the same roof. Caleb pulled Evelyn closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, and they stayed there on the porch they'd built together, in the house they'd saved together, living the life they'd chosen together, not because it was easy or perfect or what anyone else expected, but because it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. The river kept flowing, the house kept standing, and inside both, life kept happening in all its messy, beautiful, imperfect glory. That was their story, not of perfection found, but of two broken people who'd learned to build something whole from the pieces they had, who discovered that sometimes the best lives are the ones that don't look impressive from the outside but feel like home every single day from the inside. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.